Shawshank Redemption, 1994, is widely regarded as one of the greatest drama films ever made, not because it relies on spectacular action sequences or visual effects, but because it tells a deeply emotional and timeless story about hope, friendship, perseverance, justice, and the resilience of the human spirit. Written and directed by Frank Darabont, the film is based on Stephen King's novella Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, originally published in 1982. Although Stephen King is primarily known for horror stories, this novella focused on human emotions rather than supernatural terror, giving Darabont the opportunity to transform it into an unforgettable cinematic masterpiece. At the heart of the story is Andy Dufresne, a quiet, intelligent, and reserved banker whose life changes forever when he is convicted of murdering his wife and her lover. Despite repeatedly insisting that he is innocent, the court sentences him to 2 consecutive life sentences, sending him to Shawshank State Penitentiary. From that moment onward, Andy enters a brutal world where violence, corruption, hopelessness, and institutional cruelty dominate everyday life. Yet instead of allowing the prison to destroy his spirit, Andy slowly reshapes both himself and the lives of those around him through patience, intelligence, and unwavering determination. One of the film's greatest strengths lies in its ability to portray the passage of time. Rather than focusing on a few dramatic days or weeks, the story unfolds across approximately 20 years. This long timeline allows viewers to witness profound personal transformations. Prisoners grow older, relationships deepen, leadership changes, and the prison itself evolves. Andy's journey is not about surviving a short-term hardship but enduring decades of confinement while refusing to surrender his identity. The film also explores the contrast between physical imprisonment and mental freedom. Although Andy is locked behind thick stone walls and iron bars, his imagination, intelligence, and hope remain free. This central idea becomes one of the film's defining messages. The prison confines his body, but it never fully captures his mind. Andy continually finds ways to preserve his dignity, educate himself, and create moments of beauty even within one of society's harshest environments. The narrative is presented primarily through the perspective of Ellis Boyd "Red" Redding, affectionately known as Red, portrayed by Morgan Freeman. Red is an experienced inmate who has spent many years inside Shawshank. Known for his ability to obtain almost any contraband item, he has earned the trust and respect of fellow prisoners. His calm narration provides emotional depth and wisdom, allowing audiences to understand not only Andy's story but also the psychological realities of long-term imprisonment. Red initially views Andy as an unusual newcomer. Unlike most prisoners who arrive frightened or emotional, Andy remains remarkably calm. His quiet confidence makes him difficult to understand. Over time, however, Red discovers that beneath Andy's reserved personality lies extraordinary strength. Their friendship gradually becomes the emotional foundation of the entire film. Rather than relying on dramatic declarations of loyalty, their relationship develops naturally through shared conversations, mutual respect, and countless small acts of kindness over many years. The prison itself functions almost like another character in the story. Shawshank State Penitentiary is portrayed as an oppressive institution designed to strip individuals of their independence and humanity. The towering stone walls symbolize not only physical confinement but also psychological imprisonment. New arrivals are intimidated from their first moments inside the prison, quickly learning that survival often depends upon accepting harsh realities. Life inside Shawshank is filled with violence and fear. Corrupt guards abuse their authority with little accountability. The inmates establish their own social hierarchy, where power frequently belongs to the strongest and most ruthless prisoners. New inmates become targets for exploitation and violence, illustrating the brutal environment Andy must navigate from the beginning of his sentence. Among the prison staff, Captain Byron Hadley represents raw intimidation and brutality. He enforces discipline through fear rather than fairness, demonstrating how unchecked authority can become dangerous. His violent methods create an atmosphere where prisoners rarely challenge those in power, reinforcing the imbalance between guards and inmates. Even more significant is Warden Samuel Norton, who initially presents himself as a deeply religious and morally upright administrator. He frequently quotes scripture, speaks about justice and discipline, and projects an image of honesty. However, as the story unfolds, it becomes increasingly clear that Norton uses religion as a tool to justify his own corruption. His public image contrasts sharply with his private actions, making him one of the film's most complex antagonists. Andy gradually discovers that his financial expertise holds value even within prison walls. His background as a banker allows him to solve tax problems and financial issues for prison guards. A pivotal moment occurs when Andy overhears Captain Hadley discussing inheritance taxes. Andy cautiously offers legal financial advice that ultimately saves Hadley a substantial amount of money. Initially viewed with suspicion, Andy's knowledge soon earns him protection and respect from the prison administration. This event marks a turning point in Andy's prison life. Instead of performing only manual labor, he begins assisting prison officials with financial paperwork, tax returns, and investment planning. Eventually, Warden Norton realizes Andy's talents can be used on a much larger scale. Andy becomes responsible for managing complex financial records, creating false identities, and laundering money generated through Norton's illegal business operations. This arrangement illustrates one of the film's central ironies. A man imprisoned for financial crimes he did not commit is forced to participate in genuine financial corruption orchestrated by those responsible for enforcing justice. Andy recognizes that refusing the work would likely result in severe punishment, so he complies while quietly planning his own future. Despite the advantages Andy gains through his work, he never forgets his fellow prisoners. One of his earliest acts of generosity occurs when he negotiates cold beers for the inmates repairing the prison roof. Rather than accepting personal rewards, Andy asks that his co-workers receive refreshments. This seemingly simple gesture becomes profoundly meaningful because it allows the prisoners to briefly feel like ordinary working men instead of inmates. For a few precious moments, dignity replaces despair. Andy also develops a deep appreciation for education. Discovering the neglected prison library, he realizes that books can offer prisoners mental escape even when physical escape is impossible. Determined to improve the library, Andy writes weekly letters requesting financial support from government agencies. For years his requests are ignored, yet he refuses to give up. Eventually persistence pays off, and donations begin arriving. With continued determination, Andy transforms the small library into one of the finest prison libraries in the state. Shelves fill with books covering countless subjects, giving inmates opportunities to educate themselves, earn qualifications, and imagine lives beyond prison walls. This achievement demonstrates Andy's belief that knowledge represents another form of freedom. One of the film's most memorable scenes occurs when Andy locks himself inside the prison office and plays an opera recording over the loudspeakers. The beautiful music echoes throughout Shawshank, causing every prisoner to stop working and simply listen. For a brief moment, the prison walls seem to disappear as the music reminds everyone of a world beyond confinement. Although Andy is punished with solitary confinement for this act, he later explains that the music remained with him even in isolation. His statement reflects one of the movie's deepest philosophies: true freedom exists within the mind and cannot always be taken away by physical imprisonment. Friendship remains another essential theme throughout the story. Andy forms meaningful relationships not only with Red but also with elderly librarian Brooks Hatlen. Brooks has spent so many years in prison that Shawshank has become the only home he remembers. When he is finally granted parole after decades of incarceration, he struggles to adapt to modern society. Brooks' tragic experience introduces the concept of institutionalization. Long-term imprisonment can reshape a person's entire identity, making freedom itself frightening. Outside prison, Brooks feels isolated, confused, and unable to find purpose. His heartbreaking fate becomes a warning about the psychological consequences of spending a lifetime under institutional control. Years later, Red faces similar challenges after receiving parole. Having spent most of his adult life behind bars, he initially fears that he cannot survive in the outside world. However, Andy's enduring friendship ultimately gives Red the courage to embrace hope instead of surrendering to despair. This emotional continuation reinforces the lasting impact of genuine human connection. The arrival of young prisoner Tommy Williams introduces another important development. Tommy is energetic, optimistic, and unlike many older inmates, still believes in the possibility of building a future after prison. During conversations about their pasts, Tommy reveals information suggesting that another inmate at a different prison once confessed to committing the murders for which Andy had been convicted. For the first time in many years, Andy possesses evidence that could potentially prove his innocence. Filled with cautious optimism, he approaches Warden Norton and requests assistance in reopening his case. Instead of supporting justice, Norton refuses because Andy has become indispensable to his money laundering operation. Losing Andy would threaten Norton's illegal financial empire. This moment reveals the full extent of Norton's corruption. Rather than allowing an innocent man to regain his freedom, he deliberately suppresses the truth to protect himself. His decision transforms the conflict from one between prisoner and prison into a struggle between integrity and corruption. Although Andy appears defeated, he secretly continues preparing for the future. Throughout nearly 2 decades, he has patiently chipped away at the prison wall behind a poster in his cell using a small rock hammer originally obtained through Red. Because each day's progress is almost invisible, prison officials never suspect what he is accomplishing. His extraordinary patience becomes one of the greatest demonstrations of perseverance in cinematic history. The tunnel Andy creates symbolizes much more than physical escape. Every handful of stone removed represents another act of hope, another refusal to surrender. While other prisoners gradually lose faith in the future, Andy continues investing in tomorrow, even when success seems impossible. His meticulous planning extends far beyond the tunnel itself. Andy creates a fictional identity named Randall Stevens, complete with bank accounts and legal documentation. Using his accounting expertise, he carefully prepares every detail needed to expose Norton's financial crimes after escaping. His plan requires years of preparation, precision, and extraordinary self-discipline. When Andy finally escapes during a thunderstorm, the sequence becomes one of the most satisfying moments in film history. Crawling through hundreds of yards of sewage pipes before emerging into heavy rain, Andy symbolically washes away decades of suffering. Standing beneath the storm with arms raised toward the sky, he experiences genuine freedom for the first time in 20 years. His escape represents not only personal liberation but also moral victory. Andy refuses revenge through violence. Instead, he exposes corruption using legal evidence collected over many years. Authorities uncover Norton's money laundering, fraud, and abuse of power. Faced with overwhelming evidence and inevitable arrest, Norton ultimately destroys himself, illustrating that corruption eventually collapses under its own weight. Meanwhile, Red eventually receives parole and struggles to adjust to life outside prison. Like Brooks before him, he finds ordinary society unfamiliar and intimidating. Everyday decisions become overwhelming after decades of institutional routine. Yet unlike Brooks, Red remembers Andy's repeated encouragement to remain hopeful. Andy invites Red to join him in Zihuatanejo, a peaceful coastal town in Mexico where they can begin new lives far from Shawshank's painful memories. The film concludes with Red traveling toward hope rather than certainty. His reunion with Andy symbolizes the triumph of friendship, perseverance, and faith in the future. Their embrace on the beach provides emotional closure while reinforcing the central message that hope remains humanity's greatest source of strength. The production of The Shawshank Redemption is nearly as remarkable as the story it tells. Frank Darabont acquired the film rights from Stephen King in 1987 as part of King's famous Dollar Baby program, which allowed young filmmakers to adapt certain works for a symbolic fee. Although Darabont owned the rights, several years passed before development truly began. Once Castle Rock Entertainment became interested, Darabont completed the screenplay in only 8 weeks, translating King's intimate novella into a powerful cinematic narrative while preserving its emotional core. Pre-production officially began in early 1993 with a production budget of approximately $25 million. Although the fictional prison is located in Maine, the filmmakers selected the abandoned Ohio State Reformatory in Mansfield, Ohio, as the primary filming location. The enormous Gothic-style prison perfectly captured Shawshank's intimidating atmosphere with its towering walls, narrow corridors, aging stone architecture, and haunting sense of isolation. Many well-known actors were considered for the role of Andy Dufresne before Tim Robbins was cast. Several major Hollywood stars expressed interest, including Tom Hanks, Tom Cruise, and Kevin Costner. Ultimately, Robbins brought a quiet intelligence and understated emotional strength that perfectly matched Andy's personality. Rather than portraying the character as openly heroic, Robbins emphasized patience, dignity, and internal resilience. Morgan Freeman's portrayal of Red became equally iconic. Although King's novella described Red as an Irishman with reddish hair, Darabont believed Freeman possessed the wisdom, warmth, and commanding voice necessary for the role. Freeman's calm narration guides viewers through 2 decades of prison life while adding emotional richness to nearly every scene. His performance became one of the defining aspects of the film's enduring popularity. Bob Gunton delivered a chilling performance as Warden Samuel Norton. Instead of portraying evil through loud outbursts or exaggerated cruelty, Gunton emphasized controlled authority and quiet manipulation. Norton's ability to appear respectable while secretly committing serious crimes made him a believable and deeply unsettling antagonist. Thomas Newman's musical score also played an essential role in shaping the film's emotional atmosphere. His compositions rely on subtle orchestration rather than overwhelming dramatic themes. Gentle piano melodies and restrained orchestral arrangements reinforce feelings of loneliness, hope, reflection, and eventual triumph. The music enhances emotional moments without distracting from the performances or dialogue. When The Shawshank Redemption premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival on September 10, 1994, critics immediately recognized its exceptional storytelling, performances, and emotional depth. The film received widespread praise from reviewers, who admired Darabont's direction, the screenplay's emotional intelligence, and the remarkable chemistry between Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. Despite this critical acclaim, the film struggled commercially during its initial theatrical release in the United States on September 23, 1994. It earned only about $16 million during its first theatrical run, making it one of the year's most surprising box office disappointments. Several factors contributed to this outcome. The film faced intense competition from other landmark releases such as Forrest Gump and Pulp Fiction, both of which dominated public attention and attracted large audiences. Additionally, prison dramas historically appeal to relatively limited audiences compared with action films, comedies, or romantic dramas. Marketing the film also proved challenging because its title did not clearly communicate the story's content. Many potential viewers were unfamiliar with the word Shawshank and uncertain about the film's subject matter. Some believed it was a historical drama, while others assumed it was a crime thriller, reducing its immediate commercial appeal. However, the film's story did not end with its theatrical performance. Recognition at major award ceremonies, including 7 Academy Award nominations, significantly increased public interest. Combined with a successful theatrical re-release and growing international audiences, the worldwide box office eventually reached more than $73 million, allowing the film to recover financially. Its greatest transformation occurred after home video release. Hundreds of thousands of VHS copies were distributed across the United States, and positive word of mouth spread rapidly. Viewers who had missed the film in theaters discovered its emotional power at home, recommending it to friends and family. By 1995, it had become one of the most rented films in the country, demonstrating that audience appreciation often develops gradually rather than immediately. Television further expanded the film's popularity. After Turner Broadcasting acquired Castle Rock Entertainment, The Shawshank Redemption began airing regularly on TNT starting in 1997. Frequent broadcasts introduced the film to entirely new generations of viewers, many of whom encountered it unexpectedly while watching television. Each broadcast strengthened its reputation, turning it into a beloved classic that people eagerly watched repeatedly. Over the following decades, the film's cultural influence continued to grow. Audiences around the world connected with its universal themes of hope, perseverance, justice, redemption, friendship, and personal transformation. Unlike films dependent upon changing trends or visual spectacle, The Shawshank Redemption remains emotionally relevant because it explores timeless human experiences. Countless viewers have described the film as inspirational during difficult periods of their lives. Its message that hope should never be abandoned resonates across cultures, generations, and backgrounds. Andy's refusal to surrender despite overwhelming injustice reminds audiences that resilience often requires patience rather than immediate victory. The film has also become a frequent subject of discussion in film schools, storytelling courses, and screenwriting workshops. Students analyze its narrative structure, character development, pacing, symbolism, dialogue, and emotional progression as examples of masterful filmmaking. The friendship between Andy and Red is widely considered one of cinema's greatest portrayals of loyalty and mutual respect. Its lasting importance received official recognition in 2015 when the United States Library of Congress selected The Shawshank Redemption for preservation in the National Film Registry. This honor acknowledged the film's cultural, historical, and artistic significance, ensuring that future generations will continue to experience and study this remarkable achievement in American cinema. Today, more than 3 decades after its release, The Shawshank Redemption stands as far more than a prison drama. It is a profound meditation on hope, integrity, friendship, patience, justice, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Through unforgettable characters, emotionally rich storytelling, remarkable performances, and universal themes, the film continues to inspire audiences across the world. Its journey from box office disappointment to one of the most beloved and respected films in cinematic history demonstrates that true greatness is not always recognized immediately. Sometimes, like Andy Dufresne patiently carving his path to freedom one small piece at a time, enduring masterpieces earn their place through perseverance, word of mouth, and the lasting emotional impact they leave on everyone who experiences them. The central story of The Shawshank Redemption, 1994, is far more than a prison escape tale. It is an emotional journey about resilience, friendship, injustice, hope, and the extraordinary strength of the human spirit. The film follows Andy Dufresne over nearly 2 decades inside Shawshank State Prison, showing how a quiet, intelligent man survives unimaginable hardship without allowing the prison to destroy his identity. Every major event in the story builds upon the previous one, gradually revealing Andy's remarkable patience and determination while exposing the corruption that exists behind the prison walls. The story begins in 1947 in Portland, Maine. Andy Dufresne is a successful banker who has built a respectable life through intelligence, discipline, and hard work. His life changes forever when he is accused of murdering his wife and the man with whom she was having an affair. Although Andy insists throughout the trial that he is innocent, the evidence against him appears overwhelming. The court finds him guilty and sentences him to 2 consecutive life sentences at Shawshank State Prison. For Andy, this punishment represents the complete destruction of the life he once knew. In a single day he loses his freedom, career, reputation, home, and every opportunity he had planned for the future. His arrival at Shawshank marks the beginning of a long emotional struggle. Unlike many prison stories that focus only on crime or violence, the film emphasizes the psychological impact of suddenly being stripped of every aspect of one's former identity. When Andy first arrives at Shawshank, he appears calm and emotionally controlled. The other prisoners gather to watch the new inmates enter the prison, making bets on which newcomer will break down first during the terrifying first night. Most prisoners scream, cry, or beg as they realize the reality of their imprisonment. Andy, however, remains almost completely silent. His unusual composure immediately attracts the attention of Ellis Boyd "Red" Redding, commonly known as Red. Red has spent many years inside Shawshank and has developed a reputation as the prison's most reliable contraband smuggler. If an inmate needs cigarettes, playing cards, alcohol, books, or other prohibited items, Red is usually able to obtain them through his extensive network of connections. Initially, Red believes Andy is simply another educated man who will eventually lose hope like everyone else. Yet something about Andy seems different. He carries himself with quiet confidence, speaks politely, and rarely allows his emotions to become visible. This mysterious personality gradually sparks Red's curiosity. After observing Andy for some time, Red eventually speaks with him. Their first conversations are brief and somewhat cautious. Andy asks Red if he can obtain a small rock hammer, explaining that he enjoys collecting and shaping minerals as a hobby. Red finds the request amusing because such a small tool appears completely harmless. Believing it presents no security risk, Red successfully acquires the rock hammer and secretly delivers it to Andy. Along with the rock hammer, Andy also requests a large poster of actress Rita Hayworth. Like many prisoners, he wants something attractive to decorate the otherwise cold and depressing walls of his prison cell. At first, neither Red nor anyone else suspects that these ordinary items will eventually become essential parts of Andy's long-term plan. Soon after beginning prison life, Andy receives a work assignment in the prison laundry. The laundry is physically demanding, repetitive, and offers little opportunity for intellectual stimulation. It is also where Andy becomes the target of one of the prison's most feared groups. A violent gang of inmates known as the Sisters, led by Boggs Diamond, begins relentlessly harassing Andy. The gang recognizes Andy's quiet nature and mistakes his reserved personality for weakness. They repeatedly assault him both physically and sexually, attempting to dominate him through fear and humiliation. These attacks become one of the darkest aspects of Andy's prison experience. Instead of sensationalizing the violence, the film portrays it as another cruel reality of prison life. Andy refuses to surrender despite enduring repeated abuse. He fights back whenever possible, although he is often overpowered by multiple attackers. Years of abuse leave both physical and emotional scars, yet Andy refuses to let these experiences destroy his sense of dignity. His determination to survive becomes one of the earliest demonstrations of the inner strength that defines his character throughout the story. In 1949, an unexpected opportunity changes Andy's position inside Shawshank. While working outside with other prisoners, he overhears Captain Byron Hadley discussing a financial problem involving taxes on an inheritance. Hadley complains that the government will take a large portion of the money through taxation. As a trained banker, Andy immediately understands the legal financial options available. Taking an enormous personal risk, he approaches Hadley and politely offers advice on how to transfer the inheritance legally while minimizing taxes. Initially, Hadley believes Andy is attempting some kind of trick and nearly throws him from the roof. However, Andy calmly explains the financial strategy in detail, convincing Hadley that he genuinely wants to help. The advice proves extremely valuable. Hadley successfully protects much of his inheritance, saving a significant amount of money. Word quickly spreads among the prison staff that Andy possesses exceptional financial knowledge. Around the same period, the sisters launch another brutal attack against Andy, beating him so severely that he nearly dies. This assault becomes a turning point in Andy's prison life. When Captain Hadley learns about the attack, he reacts with extreme violence toward Boggs Diamond. Hadley permanently cripples Boggs, leaving him unable to continue terrorizing other prisoners. Shortly afterward, Boggs is transferred to another facility for medical treatment. Although Hadley's methods are undeniably brutal, the incident has one important consequence for Andy. From that point onward, the sisters no longer threaten him. For the first time since entering Shawshank, Andy is able to live without constantly fearing violent attacks. Recognizing Andy's usefulness, Warden Samuel Norton assigns him to work in the prison library alongside the elderly librarian Brooks Hatlen. Officially, Andy is meant to assist Brooks with organizing books and helping inmates access educational materials. In reality, however, the assignment serves another purpose. Warden Norton quickly realizes that Andy's financial expertise can greatly benefit the prison administration. Soon Andy begins preparing tax returns, investment advice, and financial records not only for Norton but also for numerous guards and prison employees. This arrangement gradually gives Andy a unique position inside Shawshank. Although he remains a prisoner, his specialized knowledge provides him certain privileges unavailable to most inmates. He spends more time indoors, gains access to paperwork, and develops regular contact with the prison administration. Unlike many prisoners who use opportunities solely for personal advantage, Andy focuses on improving life for everyone. The prison library is small, outdated, and poorly supplied. Most of the books are old, damaged, or no longer useful for education. Andy believes that reading offers prisoners an opportunity to mentally escape confinement while preparing for better lives after release. Determined to improve the library, Andy begins writing one letter every week to the state legislature requesting financial assistance. His persistence is extraordinary. Week after week, month after month, year after year, he continues sending letters despite receiving almost no response. Many people would eventually give up after repeated rejection, but Andy refuses to abandon his goal. His determination demonstrates one of the film's central messages: meaningful change often requires patience lasting years rather than days. Eventually the legislature responds. Instead of simply sending money, officials donate books, educational materials, and records. Among the donated items is a recording of Mozart's opera The Marriage of Figaro. One afternoon Andy locks himself inside the prison office and places the opera recording on the public address system. Suddenly, beautiful classical music fills every corner of Shawshank. Prisoners stop working. Guards pause in confusion. For several unforgettable minutes, the entire prison falls silent as everyone listens. Most inmates have never heard such music before, yet they instinctively recognize its beauty. Although they cannot understand the Italian lyrics, the emotional power of the performance transcends language. For those brief moments, every prisoner mentally escapes the prison walls. The music reminds them that another world still exists beyond iron bars and concrete cells. Warden Norton quickly ends the broadcast, and Andy receives punishment in solitary confinement. Even after spending days alone inside a tiny cell, Andy insists the experience was worthwhile. When Red questions whether isolation nearly broke him, Andy explains that the music remained inside his heart even when everything else had been taken away. This conversation leads to one of the film's most important philosophical discussions. Andy tells Red that hope is essential. According to Andy, hope cannot be imprisoned because it exists inside the human mind. Red disagrees. Having spent decades behind bars, Red believes hope is dangerous because it creates disappointment. Their differing perspectives reveal two completely different ways of surviving prison life. Red survives by lowering expectations. Andy survives by refusing to abandon them. This contrast becomes one of the emotional foundations of the story. Meanwhile, another heartbreaking event occurs. Brooks Hatlen, the elderly librarian, is finally granted parole after serving 50 years in prison. Most people would expect Brooks to celebrate his release. Instead, he becomes terrified. Shawshank has become his entire world. He no longer understands modern society. Outside prison, Brooks struggles with ordinary life. Technology has changed. The city feels unfamiliar. Simple daily decisions become overwhelming. Unable to adapt, Brooks falls into despair. Eventually, loneliness and hopelessness consume him, leading him to take his own life. Brooks' tragic story demonstrates the devastating effects of institutionalization. After spending decades under prison routines, freedom itself becomes frightening. His fate deeply affects both Andy and Red. Andy becomes even more determined to preserve hope. Red becomes even more convinced that hope only leads to suffering. Several years later, around 1963, Warden Norton expands his corruption. Using prison labor, he secures public construction contracts. Because inmate labor costs almost nothing, he underbids legitimate businesses. In return, corrupt officials secretly pay him bribes. Managing this growing illegal operation requires sophisticated accounting. Andy becomes responsible for laundering the money. To hide the crimes, he creates an entirely fictional identity named Randall Stevens. Andy carefully builds Stevens' financial history by opening accounts, creating documents, and maintaining detailed records. Every illegal payment passes through this invented identity before eventually benefiting Norton. Although Andy performs the work flawlessly, he never forgets that Norton is exploiting both him and the prison system. Andy quietly studies every financial record, every transaction, and every illegal payment. Unknown to Norton, Andy is preparing for a future opportunity. In 1965, a young inmate named Tommy Williams arrives at Shawshank. Unlike many long-term prisoners, Tommy possesses youthful energy and optimism. Andy and Red quickly befriend him. Discovering that Tommy struggles with education, Andy volunteers to help him earn his General Educational Development Certificate. The tutoring sessions strengthen their friendship while demonstrating Andy's lifelong belief in education. Eventually Tommy passes the examination, giving him new confidence. During casual conversations about prison life, Tommy mentions a shocking story. At another prison, one of his former cellmates had confessed to murdering a wealthy banker's wife and her lover. As Tommy describes the crime, Andy realizes the details perfectly match the murders for which he was convicted. For the first time since arriving at Shawshank, Andy possesses a witness who could potentially prove his innocence. Filled with cautious optimism, Andy immediately approaches Warden Norton. He explains Tommy's testimony and requests legal assistance in reopening his case. Any honest prison administrator would investigate such evidence. Instead, Norton refuses. The reason is simple. Andy has become indispensable. Without Andy managing the financial records, Norton's illegal money laundering operation could collapse. Protecting his own corruption matters more to Norton than correcting a wrongful conviction. When Andy insists upon pursuing justice, Norton takes ruthless action. He sends Andy to solitary confinement. During Andy's imprisonment, Norton orders Captain Hadley to eliminate Tommy. The guards stage Tommy's death as though he were attempting to escape. In reality, Tommy is murdered to ensure his testimony never reaches the courts. This act represents the moral low point of the story. An innocent man loses his life simply because he knows the truth. After spending 2 months in solitary confinement, Andy emerges physically exhausted but emotionally transformed. His appearance is disheveled. His face reflects months of isolation. Yet inside, his determination has only grown stronger. During a conversation with Red, Andy reveals his dream of living in Zihuatanejo, a peaceful coastal town on Mexico's Pacific coast. He imagines repairing old fishing boats, living quietly by the ocean, and beginning life again far from the pain of Shawshank. To Red, the dream sounds impossible. After decades in prison, freedom feels almost imaginary. Andy then asks Red for an unusual promise. If Red is ever released, he should travel to a hayfield near Buxton and search beneath a particular volcanic rock. There he will find something Andy has hidden. Red agrees, although he cannot understand why Andy believes either of them will ever leave prison. Shortly afterward, another prisoner mentions that Andy recently requested a length of rope. This alarms Red. Believing Andy may have finally lost hope after Tommy's murder and solitary confinement, Red fears his friend intends to end his own life. The following morning, prison guards discover something extraordinary. Andy has vanished. His cell appears empty. No prisoner has ever escaped Shawshank. The entire prison erupts into confusion. An enraged Warden Norton storms into Andy's cell demanding answers. In frustration, he throws a stone at the large Raquel Welch poster hanging on the wall. Instead of striking solid concrete, the rock tears through the poster. Behind it lies a tunnel. Everyone is stunned. For 19 years Andy had secretly used the tiny rock hammer Red obtained for him to chip away at the prison wall. Each day he removed only a small amount of stone. He hid the dust during daily exercise periods. His progress was so slow and careful that nobody ever suspected the tunnel's existence. The rock hammer, originally dismissed as harmless, became the tool of one of cinema's greatest escape plans. The previous night Andy crawled through the tunnel before entering an enormous sewage pipe running beneath the prison. He crawled hundreds of yards through filthy sewage until finally breaking through the pipe outside the prison walls. Emerging into heavy rain, Andy stands beneath the open sky with his arms raised. After nearly 20 years of imprisonment, he is finally free. His escape, however, represents only the first part of his plan. Dressed in Warden Norton's clothing, Andy assumes the legal identity of Randall Stevens. Using the carefully prepared documents he created over many years, he visits several banks and withdraws more than $370,000 of the money Norton had illegally laundered. Because Randall Stevens officially exists on paper, the transactions appear completely legitimate. Andy then mails Norton's secret financial ledger to a local newspaper. The ledger contains detailed evidence documenting years of corruption, fraud, bribery, and financial crimes committed inside Shawshank. Authorities immediately launch an investigation. State police arrive at the prison. Captain Hadley is arrested for murder, corruption, and numerous other crimes. Faced with overwhelming evidence and certain imprisonment, Warden Norton realizes there is no escape. Unable to face public disgrace or legal consequences, he takes his own life before officers can arrest him. Justice, delayed for many years, finally arrives. Andy not only secures his own freedom but also destroys the corrupt system that had exploited countless prisoners. His victory is achieved not through violence or revenge but through intelligence, patience, planning, and truth. The story demonstrates that hope, when combined with determination and careful preparation, can overcome even the most impossible circumstances. Andy survives 19 years of imprisonment without surrendering his humanity, proving that while walls may imprison the body, they cannot imprison the mind of someone who refuses to stop believing in a better future. His journey transforms The Shawshank Redemption from a simple prison drama into a timeless story about courage, perseverance, friendship, redemption, and the enduring power of hope. One of the greatest strengths of The Shawshank Redemption, 1994, is its unforgettable cast of characters. Every major and supporting character contributes to the emotional depth of the story, making Shawshank State Prison feel like a living, believable world rather than simply the setting of a prison drama. The performances are subtle, realistic, and emotionally powerful, allowing viewers to connect deeply with the characters and understand how each one influences Andy Dufresne's journey. Rather than relying on exaggerated personalities, the film presents ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances, with each character representing different aspects of hope, corruption, friendship, survival, and redemption. At the center of the film is Andy Dufresne, portrayed by Tim Robbins. Andy is a successful banker whose peaceful life is shattered when he is convicted of murdering his wife and her lover. Although he repeatedly insists that he is innocent, the court sentences him to 2 consecutive life terms at Shawshank State Prison. From the moment he enters the prison, Andy becomes the emotional heart of the story. Tim Robbins delivers a remarkably restrained performance that perfectly suits Andy's personality. Instead of portraying the character with dramatic emotional outbursts, Robbins relies on subtle facial expressions, quiet dialogue, and thoughtful body language. Andy rarely raises his voice or openly displays anger. Instead, his emotions remain hidden beneath a calm and controlled exterior. This approach makes the character feel realistic because Andy responds to suffering with patience and quiet determination rather than explosive reactions. When Andy first arrives at Shawshank, he appears almost detached from the terrifying environment around him. Other prisoners notice his unusual calmness, interpreting it as either courage or emotional numbness. In reality, Andy is processing the complete destruction of his former life while trying to understand the harsh reality of his new existence. Throughout the film, Andy demonstrates extraordinary intelligence. His background as a banker allows him to recognize opportunities that other prisoners overlook. Instead of allowing prison to reduce him to hopelessness, he uses his education to improve both his own circumstances and the lives of those around him. Whether preparing tax returns, expanding the prison library, educating fellow inmates, or carefully planning his escape, Andy consistently applies logic and patience to every challenge he faces. One of Andy's defining characteristics is his refusal to surrender hope. Even after suffering years of violence, isolation, injustice, and disappointment, he continues believing that life can become better. This quiet optimism separates him from many of the other inmates, who gradually accept prison as their permanent reality. Andy becomes a symbol of perseverance because he never allows prison to control his thoughts, dreams, or identity. Tim Robbins successfully portrays Andy as both emotionally vulnerable and mentally resilient. The audience sees moments of pain, fear, loneliness, and frustration, yet these emotions never permanently defeat him. Instead, every hardship strengthens his determination to preserve his dignity. By the film's conclusion, Andy has become one of cinema's greatest examples of resilience, demonstrating that true freedom begins in the mind long before it becomes physical reality. Equally important is Ellis Boyd "Red" Redding, portrayed by Morgan Freeman. Red serves as both Andy's closest friend and the narrator of the story. Through his thoughtful observations, audiences gain insight into prison life, human nature, and the emotional transformations experienced by long-term inmates. Red has spent decades inside Shawshank by the time Andy arrives. Over the years he has developed a reputation as the prison's most reliable supplier of contraband. If prisoners need prohibited items, Red usually knows how to obtain them through his extensive network of contacts. His ability to acquire almost anything earns him enormous respect among fellow inmates. Morgan Freeman's performance brings tremendous warmth and wisdom to Red. His calm voice, measured speech, and reflective narration create an atmosphere of honesty that immediately earns the audience's trust. Rather than simply describing events, Red interprets them with the perspective of someone who has witnessed countless lives transformed by prison. Initially, Red views Andy with curiosity. Andy's quiet confidence makes him difficult to understand. Over time, however, Red realizes that Andy possesses extraordinary inner strength. Their friendship develops gradually over nearly 20 years through shared conversations, mutual respect, and countless everyday interactions. Unlike many cinematic friendships built upon dramatic moments, the relationship between Andy and Red grows naturally. They support one another through simple acts of kindness, thoughtful discussions, and unwavering loyalty. Their friendship becomes the emotional foundation of the film. Red also undergoes significant personal growth. At the beginning of the story, he believes hope is dangerous because it often leads to disappointment. Having spent much of his life behind bars, Red has learned to survive by lowering his expectations. Andy challenges this philosophy, encouraging Red to believe that a better future remains possible. By the film's conclusion, Red embraces Andy's outlook. His emotional transformation illustrates one of the movie's central messages: hope can survive even after decades of despair if someone chooses to believe in it. Another central figure is Warden Samuel Norton, portrayed by Bob Gunton. Norton serves as the primary antagonist of the story, representing hypocrisy, corruption, and the abuse of authority. When viewers first meet Norton, he appears to be a deeply religious and disciplined prison administrator. He frequently quotes scripture, speaks about morality, and emphasizes the importance of law and order. His office displays religious symbols, and he presents himself as a man devoted to justice. However, this respectable public image gradually proves to be a carefully maintained illusion. Behind closed doors, Norton is dishonest, manipulative, and completely willing to sacrifice innocent lives to protect his own interests. His religious language becomes a tool for controlling prisoners rather than expressing genuine faith. Bob Gunton portrays Norton with remarkable restraint. Instead of acting like a stereotypical villain, Norton remains calm, polite, and professional during most interactions. This controlled behavior makes his corruption even more disturbing because it demonstrates how evil can exist behind an appearance of respectability. As Andy becomes responsible for managing Norton's illegal financial activities, the audience witnesses the extent of the warden's corruption. Norton profits from prison labor, accepts bribes, launders money, and suppresses evidence that could prove Andy's innocence. His greatest moral failure occurs when he refuses to investigate Tommy Williams' testimony. Rather than allowing justice to prevail, Norton chooses to protect his criminal enterprise by eliminating anyone who threatens his power. The contrast between Norton's public morality and private corruption makes him one of the film's most memorable antagonists. His eventual downfall demonstrates that abuse of authority cannot continue indefinitely without consequences. Captain Byron Hadley, portrayed by Clancy Brown, represents physical intimidation and institutional violence. As captain of the prison guards, Hadley commands enormous authority over the inmates. His reputation for brutality creates constant fear throughout Shawshank. From his first appearance, Hadley establishes himself as a man who uses violence as his primary method of maintaining order. Prisoners know that disobeying him often results in severe beatings or worse. His unpredictable temper makes every interaction dangerous. Clancy Brown's imposing physical presence contributes greatly to the character's intimidation. His deep voice, stern expressions, and commanding posture create an image of unquestionable authority. Unlike Norton, whose power depends upon manipulation, Hadley's authority relies almost entirely upon fear. Despite his violent nature, Hadley possesses one characteristic that unexpectedly benefits Andy. He recognizes practical intelligence when he sees it. After Andy legally saves him a substantial amount of inheritance tax, Hadley begins treating Andy differently from most prisoners. Although Hadley never becomes compassionate, he understands Andy's usefulness. This practical respect provides Andy with limited protection from some of the prison's dangers. Nevertheless, Hadley remains fully loyal to Norton. When ordered to eliminate Tommy Williams, he obeys without hesitation. This unquestioning loyalty illustrates how institutional corruption often depends upon individuals willing to carry out immoral orders without challenging authority. William Sadler portrays Hayworth, one of Red's closest friends and a longtime Shawshank inmate. Although Hayworth plays a supporting role, he contributes significantly to the film's sense of community among the prisoners. Hayworth often provides moments of humor that balance the story's darker themes. His casual conversations, jokes, and observations help portray prison life as more than constant suffering. Even in harsh circumstances, friendships and humor remain important sources of emotional survival. Throughout the film, Hayworth demonstrates genuine loyalty toward both Red and Andy. His reactions frequently reflect the feelings of the larger inmate population, allowing viewers to understand how Andy's actions gradually inspire hope throughout Shawshank. Gil Bellows portrays Tommy Williams, a young prisoner whose arrival dramatically changes the direction of the story. Tommy differs from many older inmates because he still possesses youthful energy, optimism, and confidence about the future. Unlike prisoners who have spent decades behind bars, Tommy has not yet become institutionalized. He speaks openly, asks questions, and remains interested in improving himself. Recognizing Tommy's potential, Andy volunteers to tutor him for his general educational development examination. These educational sessions reveal another important aspect of Andy's character. Rather than focusing solely on his own survival, Andy consistently invests time and effort in helping others build better futures. Tommy responds enthusiastically to Andy's encouragement. Passing the examination becomes one of his proudest achievements, demonstrating the transformative power of education. Tommy's greatest contribution to the story occurs when he unknowingly reveals information suggesting Andy's innocence. His testimony creates the possibility of justice after nearly 20 years. Sadly, Tommy's optimism ultimately leads to tragedy. Because he possesses knowledge that threatens Warden Norton's criminal activities, he becomes the victim of corruption. His death serves as one of the film's most heartbreaking reminders that innocent people often suffer when powerful individuals prioritize self-preservation over justice. James Whitmore delivers one of the film's most emotional performances as Brooks Hatlen. Brooks is the elderly prison librarian who has spent more than 50 years inside Shawshank. During this time, the prison has become the only world he truly understands. Brooks is gentle, polite, and deeply devoted to books. His quiet personality reflects decades of routine and institutional life. He takes pride in maintaining the library and genuinely cares about helping other prisoners read and learn. James Whitmore portrays Brooks with extraordinary sensitivity. Small gestures, soft speech, and subtle facial expressions communicate the loneliness and vulnerability of a man who has forgotten how to live outside prison walls. When Brooks finally receives parole, viewers initially expect a joyful reunion with freedom. Instead, they witness the devastating effects of institutionalization. Brooks struggles to adapt to ordinary society, where technology, transportation, and daily responsibilities have changed dramatically since his imprisonment. His inability to adjust demonstrates that physical freedom does not automatically restore emotional freedom. Years of confinement have fundamentally altered his understanding of the world. Brooks' tragic fate profoundly influences both Andy and Red. For Andy, it reinforces the importance of preserving hope and purpose. For Red, it becomes evident supporting his belief that prison permanently changes people. Mark Rolston portrays Boggs Diamond, the violent leader of a prison gang known as the Sisters. Boggs represents one of the earliest threats Andy faces after arriving at Shawshank. Unlike many antagonists motivated by financial gain or authority, Boggs seeks dominance through intimidation and violence. He repeatedly targets vulnerable inmates, using fear to establish control. Although Boggs appears in only part of the story, his actions significantly influence Andy's development. Enduring repeated assaults forces Andy to demonstrate extraordinary resilience. Instead of allowing fear to break him, Andy continues resisting, refusing to surrender his dignity despite constant abuse. Eventually, Captain Hadley's violent punishment permanently removes Boggs from Shawshank's general population, ending Andy's years of victimization. Jeffrey DeMunn portrays the prosecuting attorney responsible for presenting the case against Andy during the murder trial. Although his screen time is limited, his role establishes the injustice that drives the entire story. The prosecutor confidently presents evidence suggesting Andy's guilt, creating the impression that conviction is inevitable. His arguments demonstrate how legal systems can sometimes appear convincing even when the truth remains uncertain. Larry Brandenburg portrays Skeet, Brian Libby portrays Floyd, Neil Giuntoli portrays Jigger, David Proval portrays Snooze, and Joseph Ragno portrays Ernie. Together these supporting inmates create a believable prison environment. Their conversations, routines, and friendships make Shawshank feel populated by real individuals rather than anonymous background characters. Each inmate possesses a distinct personality despite relatively limited dialogue. Some are humorous, others skeptical, while many simply attempt to survive each day. Their presence reinforces the idea that every prisoner carries a unique history and personal struggle. Paul McCrane portrays Guard Trout, while Jude Cicolella portrays Guard Met. Both contribute to the depiction of Shawshank's prison staff. Although less prominent than Captain Hadley, they illustrate the structured hierarchy within the prison administration. Some guards simply follow orders, while others actively participate in maintaining the institution's harsh discipline. Renee Blaine portrays Andy's wife, whose tragic death becomes the central event leading to Andy's imprisonment. Although she appears only briefly through flashbacks, her character represents the life Andy permanently loses. Her relationship with another man ultimately creates the circumstances that destroy Andy's future. Because viewers never fully witness the events surrounding the murders, uncertainty continues surrounding Andy's conviction, reinforcing the film's themes of justice and wrongful punishment. Scott Mann portrays Glenn Quentin, Andy's wife's golf instructor and romantic partner. His affair with Andy's wife becomes another crucial element of the murder investigation. Like Andy's wife, Glenn appears only briefly, yet his role influences every event that follows. An interesting cameo appears through Alfonso Freeman, the real-life son of Morgan Freeman. He portrays one of the newly arrived prisoners, commonly referred to as the fresh fish convict. Although his appearance is brief, it serves as an enjoyable detail connecting the production to Morgan Freeman himself. Frank Madrono portrays Fatas, one of the newly arrived inmates during Andy's first night at Shawshank. Overwhelmed by fear, Fatas cries continuously and begs to be released. His emotional breakdown irritates Captain Hadley, who brutally beats him. Fatas later dies from his injuries. His death establishes the terrifying reality of Shawshank immediately after Andy's arrival. It demonstrates that prison authorities possess enormous power and that prisoners' lives often hold little value within the institution. Bill Bolander portrays Elmo Blatch, a convicted criminal whose confession strongly suggests that he committed the murders for which Andy was imprisoned. Although Blatch appears only briefly, his revelation becomes one of the story's most significant turning points. His confession confirms what Andy has maintained for nearly 20 years, that he is innocent. Unfortunately, because Warden Norton refuses to pursue justice, Blatch's confession never reaches the legal system in time to secure Andy's release through official channels. Ned Bellamy portrays Guard Youngblood, while Don McManus portrays Guard Wiley. These characters further develop the prison environment by showing the wide range of personalities among correctional officers. Some guards simply perform assigned duties, while others willingly support Norton's corrupt administration. Dion Anderson portrays Head Bull Haig, another member of the prison's authority structure. His presence reinforces the organized system through which Shawshank maintains discipline and control over inmates. James Kisicki portrays the manager of the Maine National Bank, while Claire Slemmer portrays one of the bank tellers. Although their appearances occur primarily during Andy's carefully planned financial operation after escaping prison, they play an important role in demonstrating the effectiveness of Andy's meticulous preparation. Because Andy spent years constructing the fictional identity of Randall Stevens, the bank employees accept his documents without suspicion. Their professionalism unintentionally allows Andy to complete the final stage of his long-awaited plan. Collectively, the cast of The Shawshank Redemption creates one of cinema's richest ensembles. Every performer, regardless of screen time, contributes meaningfully to the emotional realism of the story. The principal actors deliver nuanced performances that avoid melodrama, allowing audiences to believe completely in their characters and relationships. Tim Robbins gives Andy quiet determination and intellectual strength. Morgan Freeman provides warmth, wisdom, and emotional guidance through Red's unforgettable narration. Bob Gunton creates a chilling portrait of hidden corruption beneath religious respectability. Clancy Brown embodies institutional brutality, while James Whitmore delivers heartbreaking humanity through Brooks. Supporting actors such as William Sadler, Gil Bellows, and Mark Rolston further enrich the prison community by portraying friendship, hope, fear, and violence with remarkable authenticity. Together, these performances transform The Shawshank Redemption into far more than a prison drama. They create a deeply human story about courage, loyalty, redemption, injustice, and the enduring power of hope. The chemistry among the cast allows every emotional moment to feel genuine, ensuring that audiences remain invested in the characters from beginning to end. Decades after its release, the performances continue to be celebrated as some of the finest in modern cinema, playing a major role in the film's enduring reputation as one of the greatest and most beloved motion pictures ever made. The development of The Shawshank Redemption, 1994, is one of the most inspiring stories in modern filmmaking. The film's journey from a relatively unknown novella to one of the most celebrated motion pictures in cinematic history was neither quick nor easy. It involved years of patience, determination, creative vision, and unwavering belief in the power of storytelling. Director and screenwriter Frank Darabont played the central role in bringing the project to life, investing not only his professional skills but also his personal passion into creating a film that would eventually become a timeless classic. The origins of The Shawshank Redemption can be traced back to author Stephen King's novella Rita, Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, which was first published in 1982 as part of the collection Different Seasons. Unlike the horror novels and short stories that had made King internationally famous, Different Seasons explored entirely different literary genres. Instead of supernatural monsters, haunted houses, or terrifying creatures, these stories focused on human relationships, personal growth, redemption, and emotional struggles. Rita, Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption stood out because it centered on hope, friendship, and survival within the harsh environment of a prison. The novella was narrated primarily through the perspective of Ellis Boyd "Red" Redding, who reflects on the remarkable life of fellow inmate Andy Dufresne. The story emphasized emotional transformation rather than action, making it very different from conventional prison dramas. At the time of its publication, many readers admired the novella, but few believed it could successfully become a feature-length film. Most of the story relied on Red's observations, internal thoughts, and gradual character development rather than dramatic action sequences. Adapting such a reflective narrative into cinema required someone who understood both literature and visual storytelling. That person was Frank Darabont. Darabont's relationship with Stephen King's work had begun years earlier. As an aspiring filmmaker trying to establish himself within Hollywood, Darabont admired King's storytelling abilities and recognized the emotional depth hidden beneath many of his stories. In 1983, Darabont adapted King's short story The Woman in the Room into a short film. This opportunity became possible because of Stephen King's famous dollar deal program. King believed that talented young filmmakers deserved opportunities even if they lacked financial resources. Therefore, he allowed student and beginning directors to purchase adaptation rights for selected short stories for only $1. This generous arrangement helped numerous future filmmakers develop professional portfolios while introducing King's stories to new creative voices. For Darabont, adapting The Woman in the Room became an important learning experience. Although the project was modest in scale, it allowed him to demonstrate his abilities as a filmmaker while establishing a professional relationship with Stephen King. Several years later, Darabont's career began progressing. In 1987, he earned his first major screenwriting credit by working on A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. This achievement gave him greater confidence within the film industry and demonstrated that he possessed the skills necessary for larger projects. Following this success, Darabont returned to Stephen King with a new ambition. He wanted to adapt Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. To secure the adaptation rights, Darabont paid Stephen King $5,000. Although this amount represented a significant investment for a young filmmaker, Darabont believed deeply in the story's cinematic potential. He saw possibilities that many others overlooked. Interestingly, Stephen King himself was initially uncertain whether the novella could become a successful feature film. Much of the original story consisted of Red remembering past events and describing Andy's quiet influence on prison life. Translating this reflective narrative into an engaging visual experience presented considerable challenges. Darabont, however, never doubted the story. He believed the emotional journey was naturally cinematic. Instead of focusing on action, he envisioned a character-driven drama built around friendship, hope, patience, and redemption. King appreciated Darabont's passion and granted him the rights. Years later, Stephen King revealed another remarkable gesture reflecting the respect that developed between the two men. Rather than cashing Darabont's $5,000 payment, King framed the original check and eventually returned it to Darabont. Accompanying the framed check was a handwritten message joking that Darabont could use it someday, if you ever need bail money. The gift symbolized King's admiration for Darabont's work and his satisfaction with how the adaptation had honored the original story. Although Darabont obtained the adaptation rights in 1987, development did not begin immediately. Approximately 5 years passed before serious work started on transforming the novella into a screenplay. During those years, Darabont gained additional professional experience while continuing to think about the best approach for adapting King's work. When he finally committed himself to writing the screenplay, he completed the first draft in only 8 weeks. This relatively short writing period reflected not rushed work but years of careful preparation. Darabont had already spent considerable time imagining how the novella could become a feature film. As he wrote, Darabont understood that certain elements of King's original story required expansion while others needed modification. The screenplay therefore remained faithful to the novella's emotional core while introducing significant changes designed specifically for cinema. One of the most important changes involved Brooks Hatlen. In Stephen King's novella, Brooks appears only briefly. Although readers understand his importance, his storyline remains relatively limited. Darabont recognized that Brooks represented a powerful opportunity to explore one of prison life's most heartbreaking realities: institutionalization. He greatly expanded Brooks' role. Instead of quietly passing away in a retirement home as described in the novella, Brooks becomes one of the film's most emotionally devastating characters. After spending more than 50 years inside Shawshank, Brooks receives parole. Rather than celebrating his freedom, he becomes overwhelmed by fear. Modern society feels completely unfamiliar. Simple tasks become confusing. Loneliness gradually consumes him. Eventually, Brooks takes his own life. This expanded storyline serves multiple dramatic purposes. It demonstrates the psychological damage caused by decades of imprisonment. It warns viewers about the dangers awaiting prisoners released after spending most of their lives behind bars. Most importantly, Brooks' fate provides a powerful contrast to Andy's philosophy of hope. Where Brooks loses hope, Andy fights to preserve it. Where Brooks cannot imagine a future beyond prison, Andy spends years preparing for one. Another significant change involved Tommy Williams. In King's novella, Tommy possesses information capable of proving Andy's innocence. However, after revealing this information, Tommy is simply transferred to another prison. The transfer prevents Andy from using Tommy's testimony without requiring violence. Darabont believed the film needed greater dramatic intensity. He therefore changed Tommy's fate completely. In the screenplay, Warden Norton orders Tommy's murder. The guards disguise the killing as an attempted escape. This alteration dramatically increases the emotional impact of the story. It also transforms Norton into a far more dangerous antagonist. Rather than merely protecting prison bureaucracy, Norton actively sacrifices innocent lives to preserve his own criminal enterprise. This decision raises the moral stakes of the story while giving Andy stronger motivation to pursue escape rather than continue trusting the legal system. Darabont also simplified the prison administration. Stephen King's novella features several wardens over the many decades covered by the story. Although realistic, this structure could potentially confuse film audiences. Instead, Darabont combined multiple authority figures into the single character of Samuel Norton. This creative decision strengthened the screenplay considerably. Having one central antagonist allowed viewers to develop a deeper understanding of Norton's personality while providing the story with a clear source of conflict throughout Andy's imprisonment. Norton gradually evolves from a respectable prison administrator into the embodiment of corruption, hypocrisy, and abuse of power. His consistent presence also provides emotional continuity across the film's nearly 20-year timeline. Darabont drew inspiration from several classic films while developing both the screenplay and its overall tone. One important influence came from legendary director Frank Capra. Capra's films frequently celebrated ordinary individuals confronting injustice through courage, integrity, and perseverance. Works such as Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and It's a Wonderful Life demonstrated that emotionally uplifting stories could remain deeply moving without becoming unrealistic. Darabont admired Capra's optimistic storytelling philosophy. He later explained that he viewed The Shawshank Redemption less as a conventional prison movie and more as a modern fairy tale or inspirational fable. Although the setting involved prison walls, violence, and corruption, the emotional focus remained hope and redemption. This perspective shaped every aspect of the screenplay. Rather than emphasizing brutality, Darabont concentrated on personal transformation. Another major influence came from Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas. Although the two films belong to entirely different genres, Darabont admired Goodfellas' ability to portray the passage of many years through carefully structured dialogue and storytelling. The Shawshank Redemption covers approximately 2 decades. Maintaining audience engagement across such a long timeline required elegant transitions between years. Darabont therefore used Red's narration alongside carefully chosen conversations and events to communicate the gradual passage of time. This technique allows viewers to experience 20 years without feeling rushed or confused. Darabont also admired Birdman of Alcatraz, a respected prison drama directed by John Frankenheimer. The film demonstrated that prison stories could explore complex psychological themes rather than relying solely on violence or escape attempts. Ironically, while scouting locations for The Shawshank Redemption, Darabont unexpectedly encountered John Frankenheimer himself. Frankenheimer happened to be searching for locations for another prison-related production. Instead of viewing the younger filmmaker as competition, Frankenheimer generously offered advice and encouragement. For Darabont, meeting one of his creative inspirations during production became an unforgettable experience. Although Darabont possessed a strong screenplay, convincing a studio to finance the project remained difficult. At the time, prison dramas rarely achieved major box office success. Hollywood executives generally considered the genre financially risky because audiences often preferred action films, romantic comedies, or large-scale adventures. Many producers doubted that viewers would enthusiastically support a slow, emotional drama set almost entirely inside a prison. Fortunately, one important supporter recognized the screenplay's exceptional quality. Liz Glotzer, a producer at Castle Rock Entertainment, read Darabont's script and immediately believed in the project. She reportedly became so passionate about the screenplay that she made it clear she wanted the company to produce the film. Her enthusiasm proved essential. Within the studio, Glotzer became one of the screenplay's strongest advocates. Another important supporter emerged in Rob Reiner. Reiner had already achieved enormous success directing films such as Stand By Me, another adaptation of a Stephen King novella from different seasons. After reading Darabont's screenplay, Reiner admired it immensely. He believed it possessed extraordinary emotional power. So impressed was Reiner that he offered to purchase the screenplay from Darabont. The offer reportedly ranged between approximately $2.4 million and $3 million. For a relatively young filmmaker, this represented an extraordinary financial opportunity. Even more remarkably, Reiner planned to direct the film himself. His vision reportedly included casting major Hollywood stars such as Tom Cruise in the role of Andy Dufresne and Harrison Ford as Red. From a commercial perspective, the proposal made perfect sense. Well-known stars could potentially attract larger audiences while Reiner's reputation might reassure investors. Castle Rock Entertainment also made Darabont another tempting proposal. The studio offered to finance virtually any other project he wished to direct if he agreed to allow Reiner to take over The Shawshank Redemption. For someone who had grown up experiencing financial hardship, accepting the money would have been entirely understandable. Darabont seriously considered the proposal. He understood that millions of dollars could permanently improve his financial security while accelerating his Hollywood career. However, another consideration proved even more important. The Shawshank Redemption represented his personal dream. He believed no one else could realize the emotional vision he had carried for years. After careful reflection, Darabont declined the offer. Instead of choosing immediate wealth, he chose creative ownership. Years later, Darabont explained that continuously postponing one's dreams for financial rewards ultimately risks never achieving those dreams at all. His decision became one of the defining moments of his career. Rather than feeling disappointed, Rob Reiner respected Darabont's commitment. Instead of directing the film himself, Reiner became an important mentor throughout production. His guidance helped Darabont navigate the many challenges facing a first-time feature director. With Castle Rock Entertainment fully supporting the project, development accelerated rapidly. Only 2 weeks after presenting the screenplay, Darabont secured a production budget of approximately $25 million. For a thoughtful character drama without major action sequences or expensive visual effects, this represented a substantial investment. The budget allowed Darabont to pursue high production values while maintaining artistic freedom. As both writer and director, Darabont received a salary of approximately $750,000 along with a percentage of potential profits. Although considerably smaller than the amount Reiner had offered to purchase the screenplay outright, the arrangement allowed Darabont to remain creatively responsible for every aspect of the film. Pre-production officially began in January 1993. This phase involved transforming the screenplay into a practical production plan. Casting directors searched for actors capable of portraying emotionally complex characters. Location scouts examined prisons and historical buildings suitable for representing Shawshank State Prison. Production designers began planning sets, costumes, props, and visual details reflecting nearly 20 years of changing prison life. Every creative department worked closely with Darabont to ensure consistency. Because the story spans multiple decades, costumes, hairstyles, vehicles, documents, furniture, and countless background details required careful historical accuracy. The prison itself needed to feel believable as both a physical institution and a symbolic representation of confinement. Throughout pre-production, Darabont remained committed to preserving the screenplay's emotional focus. Rather than creating a conventional prison thriller centered on violence or escape, he insisted the film remain fundamentally about friendship, hope, and redemption. Every creative decision reflected this philosophy. Dialogue emphasized emotional honesty. Character relationships developed gradually. Even dramatic moments served larger themes rather than existing purely for excitement. Darabont also understood the importance of pacing. The story unfolds across nearly 20 years, requiring audiences to experience gradual emotional evolution. Instead of rushing through events, he structured the screenplay so each significant moment built naturally upon previous experiences. This patient storytelling style became one of the film's defining strengths. Another notable aspect of development involved balancing realism with symbolism. The library symbolizes education and intellectual freedom. Music represents emotional liberation. The rock hammer becomes a symbol of persistence. The tunnel embodies hope patiently transformed into reality. Rain symbolizes spiritual cleansing and rebirth. These symbolic elements emerged naturally during screenplay development, enriching the story without distracting from its realism. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Shawshank Redemption's development lies in the unwavering confidence Frank Darabont demonstrated from beginning to end. At nearly every stage, reasons existed to abandon the project. The source material seemed difficult to adapt. The genre appeared commercially risky. A respected director offered millions of dollars for the screenplay. Studio executives questioned prison dramas. Yet Darabont consistently trusted his instincts. He believed audiences would connect with honest human emotion more deeply than temporary spectacle. History ultimately proved him correct. The careful development process transformed Stephen King's thoughtful novella into a screenplay that preserved the original work's emotional heart while expanding its cinematic possibilities. Every significant adaptation decision, from enlarging Brooke's storyline and reshaping Tommy's fate to creating a single powerful antagonist and emphasizing hope as the film's central theme, strengthened the narrative without betraying its source. Frank Darabont's determination to direct the film himself, despite extraordinary financial temptation, ensured that his personal vision remained intact from script to screen. The result was not simply an adaptation but a masterfully crafted work of cinema whose development stands as an inspiring example of artistic conviction, creative perseverance, and the belief that meaningful storytelling can transcend commercial expectations and ultimately achieve lasting greatness. Casting is often one of the most important stages in the creation of any film because the right actors can transform a well-written script into an unforgettable cinematic experience. In the case of The Shawshank Redemption, 1994, the casting process was both lengthy and fascinating. Many well-known Hollywood stars were considered for major roles before the final cast was assembled. The decisions made by director Frank Darabont ultimately proved to be among the film's greatest strengths, as every principal actor brought emotional depth, realism, and authenticity to the story. Decades later, the performances remain some of the most admired in film history, and it is difficult to imagine any other actors portraying these iconic characters. One of the most significant casting decisions involved Morgan Freeman as Ellis Boyd "Red" Redding. In Stephen King's original novella, Red is described as a white Irish prisoner with reddish hair, which explains his nickname. At first glance, this description appears completely different from Morgan Freeman, who is African American. However, producer Liz Glotzer believed that finding the best actor for the role mattered far more than strictly following the physical description from the source material. Glotzer strongly recommended Freeman to Frank Darabont, believing he possessed the wisdom, warmth, intelligence, and emotional presence needed to bring Red to life. Darabont agreed with the suggestion, recognizing that Freeman's voice and acting ability perfectly matched the personality he envisioned for the character. Instead of attempting to ignore the difference between the novella and the film, Darabont cleverly acknowledged it through humor. Early in the story, Andy asks Red why everyone calls him Red. Freeman's character casually replies, "Maybe it's because I'm Irish." The line immediately became one of the film's most memorable jokes. It demonstrates the screenplay's confidence while gently acknowledging the casting change without distracting from the story. Once audiences hear the joke, the issue disappears completely because Freeman's performance becomes so convincing that viewers cannot imagine anyone else playing Red. Morgan Freeman approached the role with remarkable simplicity. Unlike actors who spend months researching prison environments or studying criminal behavior, Freeman believed such preparation was unnecessary for this particular character. He explained that imprisonment does not fundamentally change human nature. People remain people regardless of their surroundings. According to Freeman, prison simply forces individuals to adapt to difficult circumstances. Instead of researching prison life in detail, he concentrated on portraying Red as a believable human being who had learned to survive within the prison system. This philosophy shaped every aspect of his performance. Red speaks calmly. He observes more than he talks. He rarely displays strong emotions openly. Years inside Shawshank have taught him patience and caution. Freeman communicates these qualities through subtle facial expressions, thoughtful pauses, and his distinctive voice rather than exaggerated acting. Perhaps the most famous aspect of Freeman's performance is his narration. Throughout the film, Red guides audiences through nearly 20 years of prison life. His narration never feels artificial. Instead, it resembles an old friend sharing memories filled with wisdom, regret, humor, and hope. His voice gives emotional continuity to the story, allowing viewers to experience the gradual passage of time naturally. The narration also strengthens the friendship between Red and Andy because audiences experience much of the story through Red's growing admiration for his friend. Frank Darabont was already familiar with Morgan Freeman's earlier work. One performance that particularly impressed him came in Brubaker, another prison drama released in 1980. Although Freeman's role in that film was relatively small, Darabont recognized qualities that would later prove invaluable in The Shawshank Redemption. Tim Robbins was equally enthusiastic about Freeman's casting. Having grown up watching Freeman perform on the educational children's television series The Electric Company, Robbins greatly admired him long before they worked together. The opportunity to act alongside someone he respected became an exciting professional experience. The chemistry between Robbins and Freeman ultimately became one of the film's greatest strengths. Their friendship develops naturally because both actors avoid theatrical performances. Instead of relying on dramatic speeches, they build their relationship through quiet conversations, shared experiences, mutual respect, and subtle emotional growth. The result feels completely genuine. Finding the right actor to portray Andy Dufresne proved considerably more complicated. Andy is one of the most emotionally demanding characters in modern cinema. He must appear intelligent yet humble, quiet yet emotionally compelling, resilient yet vulnerable. Finding an actor capable of balancing all these qualities required an extensive search. Initially, Darabont considered several of his favorite actors. Gene Hackman and Robert Duvall were among the earliest possibilities. Both possessed extraordinary acting reputations and had successfully portrayed complex dramatic characters throughout their careers. However, scheduling conflicts prevented either actor from participating. Other respected performers also entered discussions. Clint Eastwood and Paul Newman were considered at various points during development. Both actors had enormous screen presence and extensive experience leading major films. Although each could likely have delivered a memorable performance, circumstances prevented either from accepting the role. The production then approached several of Hollywood's biggest stars. Tom Cruise received an offer and reportedly participated in script readings. Cruise appreciated the screenplay and recognized its quality. However, he ultimately decided against accepting the role. One significant factor was Darabont's limited directing experience. As a first-time feature director, Darabont represented a professional risk compared with more established filmmakers. Tom Hanks also received the opportunity. At that time, Hanks had already committed himself to Forrest Gump. Scheduling conflicts therefore prevented him from portraying Andy. Ironically, Forrest Gump became one of the major films competing against The Shawshank Redemption during award season. Kevin Costner likewise turned down the role because he had committed to starring in Waterworld, another ambitious production demanding his full attention. Several additional actors entered consideration throughout development. Johnny Depp attracted attention because of his growing popularity and ability to portray emotionally complex characters. Nicolas Cage's name also appeared during casting discussions due to his reputation for unconventional performances. Charlie Sheen was another possibility considered during the search. Each actor possessed qualities potentially suitable for Andy, yet none ultimately became involved. Frank Darabont eventually found his Andy in Tim Robbins. The decision was strongly influenced by Robbins' remarkable performance in the psychological drama Jacob's Ladder. Darabont admired Robbins' ability to portray internal emotional conflict without relying upon excessive dialogue. Andy Dufresne required precisely this skill. Much of Andy's emotional journey occurs internally. He rarely explains his feelings. Instead, audiences understand him through expressions, actions, and quiet determination. Robbins excelled in this style of performance. His height also contributed unexpectedly to the character. Andy often appears physically vulnerable compared with guards and violent inmates. Robbins' lean build reinforces this impression while simultaneously emphasizing his intellectual rather than physical strength. Once Robbins accepted the role, he committed himself fully to preparation. Rather than simply memorizing dialogue, he wanted to understand how imprisonment affects daily behavior. He visited a zoo and carefully observed caged animals. Watching how they reacted to confinement helped him imagine the psychological effects of long-term imprisonment. Although humans differ greatly from animals, Robbins believed the emotional impact of confinement could provide valuable insight into Andy's experience. He also spent time inside solitary confinement. Experiencing isolation firsthand allowed him to understand the overwhelming silence, loneliness, and emotional pressure faced by prisoners placed in disciplinary segregation. While a brief visit could never replicate months or years of imprisonment, the experience helped Robbins appreciate the psychological intensity of Andy's punishment. Robbins further prepared by speaking directly with prison guards and inmates. These conversations provided practical information about prison routines, behavior, communication, and relationships between staff and prisoners. Listening to real experiences allowed him to portray Andy with greater authenticity. Another unusual aspect of Robbins' preparation involved physically wearing handcuffs and leg shackles for several hours. Experiencing restricted movement helped him understand how imprisonment affects posture, walking, and everyday activities. Small physical details such as these contributed significantly to the realism of his performance. The role of Tommy Williams underwent an interesting casting journey as well. Initially, Brad Pitt had been selected to portray the young inmate. At that stage of his career, Pitt was still establishing himself within Hollywood. However, following the enormous success of Thelma and Louise, his career accelerated rapidly. As larger opportunities emerged, Pitt departed the production. His departure opened the door for Gil Bellows. For Bellows, The Shawshank Redemption represented an extraordinary opportunity early in his career. Although less famous than Pitt, Bellows delivered a sincere and emotionally engaging performance. His youthful enthusiasm contrasts sharply with the weary attitudes of older prisoners. Tommy still believes life can improve. He remains optimistic. He studies for his educational examination. He dreams of rebuilding his future after prison. This optimism makes his eventual fate even more heartbreaking. Bellows successfully portrays Tommy's innocence without making the character appear naive. Another actor who declined participation was James Gandolfini. Before becoming internationally famous for portraying Tony Soprano, Gandolfini was considered for the role of Boggs Diamond, the violent leader of the Sisters Gang. Although Gandolfini ultimately chose not to participate, the role went to Mark Rolston, who created one of the film's most intimidating supporting villains. Boggs becomes a terrifying representation of the dangers Andy faces during his early years in prison. The role of Warden Samuel Norton required another carefully considered casting decision. Bob Gunton became the eventual choice despite facing unexpected production challenges. At the time of his audition, Gunton was simultaneously working on the science fiction action film Demolition Man. For that role, his head had been completely shaved. Unfortunately, Norton needed to appear considerably older across the film's 20-year timeline. The production therefore required Gunton to have hair that could gradually appear grayer as time passed. To solve the problem, Frank Darabont and producer Nicky Marvin arranged an ingenious solution. A specially designed wig was created for Gunton. Using his day off from Demolition Man, Gunton filmed a complete screen test wearing the wig. The test paired him with Tim Robbins while cinematographer Roger Deakins photographed the performance. The results convinced everyone involved that Gunton perfectly understood Norton's personality. Gunton portrayed the warden not as an obvious villain but as someone whose outward respectability concealed deep corruption. His calm voice, disciplined posture, and controlled facial expressions created a man capable of appearing trustworthy while secretly committing terrible crimes. Another practical advantage also favored Gunton. His height closely resembled Tim Robbins. This similarity later became important during Andy's escape. After leaving prison, Andy wears Norton's clothing while assuming the identity of Randall Stevens. Because Gunton and Robbins shared similar physical proportions, audiences could easily believe Andy successfully disguised himself using the warden suit. Clancy Brown portrayed Captain Byron Hadley, one of Shawshank's most feared guards. To prepare actors realistically, the production's liaison officer offered Brown opportunities to speak with former correctional officers. Interestingly, Brown declined. He believed consulting real guards might unintentionally suggest that Hadley's brutal behavior represented actual prison employees. Brown preferred creating the character entirely through imagination rather than implying that Ohio correctional officers inspired such extreme cruelty. His approach emphasized Hadley as a fictional embodiment of abusive authority rather than a representation of specific individuals. The result is a frightening yet believable character whose violence reflects institutional corruption rather than documentary realism. William Sadler, who portrays Hayworth, shared a long professional relationship with Frank Darabont before production began. The two had worked together on the television series Tales from the Crypt, where Darabont served as a writer. As early as 1989, Darabont had already discussed his dream of adapting Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. Sadler remembered those conversations years later when Darabont finally invited him to join the completed film. This long creative friendship contributed to the comfortable collaboration seen throughout production. Hayworth may not dominate the story, but Sadler gives him warmth, humor, and authenticity. His interactions with Red and Andy help establish the sense of community among longtime inmates. One particularly enjoyable casting detail involves Morgan Freeman's son, Alfonso Freeman. He appears briefly in two different ways. First, he portrays the younger version of Red visible in police mugshot photographs. Because father and son naturally resemble one another, the transition feels convincing. Alfonso also appears among the prisoners when Andy first enters Shawshank. He enthusiastically shouts, "Fresh fish," alongside the other inmates welcoming the newcomers. Although these appearances are brief, they provide an interesting family connection within the production. The filmmakers also sought authenticity by including people with genuine prison experience. Among the background performers were former inmates who had once lived inside the Ohio State Reformatory. Their first-hand familiarity with prison routines helped create believable behavior during large crowd scenes. A former warden from the same institution also participated. Additionally, active correctional officers from nearby facilities appeared as extras. Their experience contributed subtle realism to marching formations, security procedures, and everyday prison operations. Although most viewers never consciously notice these details, they help make Shawshank feel like a functioning institution rather than a movie set. Perhaps the funniest casting story concerns the film's title. Because the original novella was called Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, many people misunderstood the meaning. Some actors apparently believed Rita Hayworth represented an actual character appearing in the screenplay. Several hopeful performers arrived expecting to audition for Rita herself. One particularly memorable applicant reportedly even arrived dressed in drag clothing, believing the role genuinely existed. The misunderstanding amused the filmmakers and demonstrated how unusual the title seemed before audiences became familiar with the story. Although these auditions did not lead to casting, they became one of the production's most entertaining behind-the-scenes anecdotes. Another important contribution to casting came indirectly through Tim Robbins. After accepting the role of Andy, Robbins strongly encouraged Darabont to hire cinematographer Roger Deakins. The two had previously collaborated on the Hudsucker Proxy, and Robbins deeply admired Deakins' visual storytelling abilities. Although not an actor, Deakins' eventual involvement greatly influenced how audiences experienced every performance. His lighting, camera movement, and composition emphasized emotional realism rather than flashy visual effects. The actors benefited enormously from this approach because subtle expressions and quiet moments remained the primary focus. The casting philosophy throughout the Shawshank Redemption consistently prioritized acting ability over commercial popularity. Although numerous internationally famous stars considered the project, Darabont repeatedly chose performers who best understood the emotional truth of each character. This decision allowed relationships to feel authentic rather than dominated by celebrity personas. Morgan Freeman embodied wisdom, friendship, and emotional maturity through understated brilliance. Bob Gunton created a chilling antagonist hidden beneath apparent respectability. Clancy Brown represented institutional brutality with terrifying conviction. Gil Bellows captured youthful optimism, while William Sadler added warmth and humor to prison life. Even performers with only a few scenes contributed memorable moments that strengthened the film's emotional impact. Looking back, it is remarkable how many different casting possibilities existed during development. Had Tom Cruise accepted the role of Andy, had Brad Pitt remained as Tommy, or had Rob Reiner directed the project with an entirely different cast, the finished film might have become something completely different. Instead, Frank Darabont assembled an ensemble of actors whose chemistry, commitment, and authenticity perfectly matched his vision. Their dedication transformed Stephen King's characters into living, unforgettable human beings whose hopes, fears, friendships, and struggles continue to resonate with audiences around the world. The casting of The Shawshank Redemption stands as one of the finest examples of choosing performers not simply for fame, but for their ability to serve the emotional heart of a story, helping create a film that has endured as one of the greatest achievements in cinematic history. Post-production is the stage where a film truly comes together. While filming captures the performances, locations, and visual elements, post-production shapes those raw materials into a coherent, emotionally engaging story. Editing, sound design, music, color correction, pacing, and final scene selection all determine how audiences ultimately experience a film. In the case of The Shawshank Redemption, 1994, post-production played an enormous role in transforming Frank Darabont's vision into one of the most beloved films in cinema history. Many important creative decisions were made after filming had finished, and these choices greatly influenced the emotional impact, pacing, and unforgettable ending that audiences continue to celebrate today. The final theatrical version of The Shawshank Redemption runs approximately 142 minutes. Although this is considered a lengthy running time for a drama, every major scene contributes to the gradual emotional development of the characters and the overall message of hope. Rather than rushing through Andy Dufresne's 20-year journey, the film allows viewers to experience the slow passage of time alongside the prisoners. However, the version audiences eventually saw was not the first completed edit. Like many films, The Shawshank Redemption initially existed as a much longer rough cut. After filming was completed, editor Richard Francis Bruce and director Frank Darabont assembled all of the available footage according to the screenplay. This first version contained nearly every filmed scene and closely followed Darabont's original script. The initial edit lasted almost 2.5 hours. Although only slightly longer than the final release, those additional minutes noticeably affected the film's pacing. Scenes that appeared emotionally meaningful during production sometimes slowed the story when viewed as part of the complete film. This illustrates one of the most important principles of editing. A beautifully acted or emotionally powerful scene does not necessarily belong in the finished movie. Editors must constantly balance storytelling, pacing, emotional rhythm, and audience engagement. Sometimes removing a favorite scene actually improves the entire film. Producer Liz Glotzer played an important role during this stage. After watching the first assembled version, she felt that although the story remained emotionally compelling, certain sequences lingered longer than necessary. Her observations encouraged Darabont and the editing team to carefully reconsider which moments truly strengthened the narrative. One of the most significant sequences shortened during editing involved Red's adjustment to life after being released from prison. In the completed film, audiences witness Red struggling to adapt to the outside world after decades of incarceration. He works at a grocery store. He rents a small room. He follows daily routines while battling loneliness and uncertainty. These scenes intentionally parallel Brooks Hatland's earlier experience after parole. Originally, this section lasted considerably longer. Darabont wanted audiences to fully understand Red's emotional isolation and fear as he entered a world that had completely changed during his imprisonment. Additional scenes explored his daily routine, internal struggles, and uncertainty about the future in greater detail. During test screenings, however, viewers responded differently than expected. By this stage of the story, audiences had already become deeply invested in Andy and Red's friendship. Most viewers firmly believed Red would ultimately honor Andy's instructions and travel toward hope rather than surrendering to despair. Because of this emotional expectation, the extended sequence created an unintended effect. Instead of increasing suspense, it delayed the inevitable reunion. Audience members became impatient because they wanted to see Red continue his journey toward Andy. Recognizing this reaction, Darabont shortened the sequence. The revised version still communicates Red's fear, loneliness, and institutionalization, but it does so more efficiently. As a result, the emotional momentum continues building naturally toward the film's uplifting conclusion. Another scene removed during editing involved prison guards investigating Andy Dufresne's escape tunnel. Following Andy's disappearance, the screenplay originally included additional moments showing guards examining the tunnel in greater detail. These scenes explained exactly how the escape had occurred and emphasized the prison administration's confusion. Although technically interesting, the sequence created a pacing problem. The audience had already experienced the excitement of discovering the tunnel. Continuing the investigation delayed the story's movement toward Andy's successful escape, Norton's downfall, and Red's eventual release. The editors concluded that viewers did not require every practical detail. Instead, allowing audiences to imagine portions of the investigation actually strengthened the dramatic impact. By removing unnecessary explanation, the escape sequence became faster, more exciting, and emotionally satisfying. Another major editorial change involved the film's opening. Frank Darabont originally planned a much different introduction. His earliest concept included a cold open, depicting the events surrounding the murders of Andy's wife and her lover. Rather than beginning with Andy arriving at Shawshank, audiences would first witness portions of the crime, followed by Andy's arrest and trial. The courtroom proceedings were intended to continue throughout the opening credits. This structure emphasized the legal case against Andy while gradually introducing viewers to the circumstances leading to his imprisonment. As editing progressed, however, Darabont realized that this approach slowed the beginning of the story. The audience spent too much time before reaching Shawshank itself. Since the prison becomes the primary setting for nearly the entire film, delaying Andy's arrival reduced the narrative's momentum. The editors therefore reorganized the opening. Instead of presenting lengthy courtroom scenes, they condensed the information into a tighter, more direct introduction. This revised opening quickly establishes Andy's conviction before moving rapidly toward his arrival at Shawshank. The result immediately immerses viewers in the prison environment, allowing the central story to begin much sooner. Darabont later described this revised structure as creating a far more powerful opening. Rather than dwelling excessively on the legal process, the film immediately confronts audiences with Andy's terrifying new reality. One of the greatest disappointments of post-production involved a scene that never reached the screen at all. Unlike deleted scenes removed during editing, this sequence was never filmed. Darabont later described it as one of the finest pieces of writing he had created for the screenplay. Unfortunately, production scheduling prevented the crew from filming it before principal photography concluded. The scene centered on Red experiencing a dream. Within the dream, he is mysteriously pulled into the famous Rita Hayworth poster hanging inside Andy's prison cell. Instead of finding himself inside the prison, Red suddenly arrives alone on the Pacific coastline. Standing before the vast ocean, he feels completely isolated. Rather than celebrating freedom, he becomes overwhelmed by fear. He realizes he no longer knows where he belongs. According to the screenplay, Red quietly admits that he is terrified because there is no way home. This dream possessed powerful symbolic meaning. Throughout most of the story, prison represents suffering. Yet after spending decades inside Shawshank, prison also becomes the only home Red truly remembers. The ocean symbolizes unlimited freedom. However, unlimited freedom also demands responsibility, uncertainty, and difficult choices. The dream therefore captures the emotional conflict experienced by many long-term prisoners approaching release. Although Darabont regretted losing the sequence, its absence ultimately did not diminish the story's emotional power. Instead, Red's later experiences after parole communicate similar emotions through realistic events rather than dream imagery. Perhaps the most important post-production decision involved the ending itself. Today, audiences almost universally associate the Shawshank Redemption with its uplifting beach reunion between Andy and Red. Yet this iconic conclusion nearly never appeared in the film. Frank Darabont originally envisioned a far more ambiguous ending. In his first version, Red boards a bus heading toward the Mexican border. The audience understands that he intends to search for Andy. However, the film ends before viewers discover whether the two friends actually reunite. Darabont believed this conclusion better reflected life's uncertainty. He preferred allowing audiences to imagine what happened next rather than showing the reunion directly. Producer Liz Glotzer strongly disagreed. Having followed Andy and Red's friendship across nearly 20 years of hardship, she believed audiences deserved emotional closure. Viewers had invested enormous emotional energy in these characters. Simply ending with Red traveling south might leave many people feeling emotionally incomplete. Glotzer therefore argued passionately for filming the reunion. Rather than forcing Darabont to accept her opinion, Castle Rock Entertainment proposed a compromise. The studio agreed to finance filming of the beach reunion without requiring Darabont to include it. This arrangement protected the director's artistic freedom. After filming both versions, Darabont retained complete authority over the final decision. The reunion itself originally lasted longer than what audiences eventually saw. Andy and Red shared additional dialogue. Some of their conversation echoed lines spoken during their very first meeting years earlier inside Shawshank. Although emotionally meaningful, Darabont later felt the extended conversation appeared overly sentimental. He believed the emotional power of the reunion came from seeing the friends together rather than hearing lengthy speeches. As a result, much of the dialogue was removed. The final version relies primarily upon visual storytelling. Red approaches Andy repairing his boat. The two men smile. They embrace warmly. The ocean stretches peacefully into the distance. Without excessive dialogue, audiences immediately understand everything. Friendship has survived. Hope has triumphed. Their journey is finally complete. This restrained approach gives the reunion extraordinary emotional strength. Sometimes silence communicates more than words. Before finalizing the film, The Shawshank Redemption underwent test screenings. These screenings allow filmmakers to observe ordinary audience reactions before theatrical release. Viewers complete questionnaires, discuss their opinions, and help identify pacing issues or confusing moments. The response to the beach reunion proved overwhelming. Test audiences consistently identified it as their favorite scene. Many viewers described the ending as emotionally satisfying and deeply uplifting. Both Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman also believed the reunion should remain. Having portrayed Andy and Red's friendship throughout production, they felt audiences deserved to witness its fulfillment. Initially reluctant, Darabont carefully considered these reactions. Eventually he changed his mind. Watching audiences respond emotionally convinced him that the reunion genuinely enhanced the story rather than weakening it. He later described the beach as a magical destination representing the perfect conclusion for two men who had endured extraordinary hardship. His willingness to reconsider demonstrates an important quality shared by many successful filmmakers. Creative vision remains essential. However, remaining open to thoughtful feedback can sometimes improve that vision. The reunion ultimately became one of cinema's most beloved endings. It perfectly balances realism with optimism, providing emotional closure without becoming excessive. Another crucial aspect of post-production involved the film's musical score. Music often shapes audience emotions as powerfully as dialogue or acting. For The Shawshank Redemption, composer Thomas Newman faced an unusual challenge. Unlike many films requiring music to generate excitement or emotion, Darabont's screenplay and performances already possessed tremendous emotional strength. Newman later explained that finding the appropriate musical approach proved surprisingly difficult. He worried that overly dramatic music might distract audiences from the performances. Instead of enhancing scenes, excessive orchestration could overwhelm the film's quiet emotional honesty. Therefore, Newman adopted an understated style. Rather than composing grand heroic themes, he created delicate, reflective pieces emphasizing subtle emotion. Piano melodies, gentle strings, woodwinds, and carefully restrained orchestration became the foundation of the soundtrack. This approach allowed music to support the story rather than dominate it. One of the score's most important compositions accompanies Andy's escape from Shawshank. The piece, commonly known as Shawshank Redemption, plays as Andy crawls through the sewage pipe before emerging into the rain. Originally, Newman composed the music using a repeating three-note motif. The melody expressed triumph and liberation after years of suffering. Frank Darabont appreciated the composition but felt one aspect required adjustment. He believed the three-note pattern sounded slightly too victorious. At that point in the story, Andy has certainly achieved freedom. However, his escape also represents years of pain, sacrifice, and endurance. Darabont wanted the emotional tone to remain humble rather than celebratory. He therefore asked Newman to simplify the theme. The composer reduced the central motif to a single repeated note. This seemingly minor change transformed the emotional character of the music. Instead of sounding triumphant, it became reflective, patient, and deeply moving. The simplified melody perfectly matched Andy's personality. His victory never feels arrogant. It feels quietly earned. Another memorable composition appears after Red receives parole. The piece accompanies his emotional journey as he remembers Andy's instructions, travels toward Buxton, discovers the hidden package, and decides to continue toward Mexico. Thomas Newman later identified this composition, titled So Was Red, as one of his personal favorites. Originally, Newman intended the piece to feature only a solo oboe. The instrument's warm, melancholic tone reflected Red's uncertainty and loneliness after leaving prison. During discussions with Darabont, however, another idea emerged. Andy had previously given Red a harmonica as a symbol of friendship and hope. Including harmonica within the score would subtly connect the music to Andy's continuing influence even though he remained physically absent. Initially reluctant, Newman eventually agreed to experiment with the idea. The harmonica added emotional warmth without overwhelming the composition. Its gentle sound suggests memory, friendship, freedom, and quiet optimism. The recording itself became another memorable production story. Veteran harmonica musician Tommy Morgan performed the part. According to Darabont, Morgan immediately understood exactly what the scene required. On his very first attempt, he delivered a performance that perfectly captured the desired emotional tone. No extensive revisions became necessary. The first take appears in the completed film. This remarkable efficiency reflects the extraordinary talent sometimes found among experienced studio musicians. Newman's complete score received widespread praise following the film's release. Rather than competing with dialogue, it gently supports the emotional journey. Viewers often remember the feelings created by the music without consciously noticing individual compositions. This subtlety represents one of the soundtrack's greatest achievements. A truly effective film score often becomes inseparable from the story itself. The audience feels the music even when not actively listening to it. The success of Newman's work extended far beyond The Shawshank Redemption. Its emotional style proved so effective that excerpts from the soundtrack were later used in numerous movie trailers promoting completely different films. Hollywood trailer editors recognized the score's ability to evoke hope, inspiration, reflection, and emotional depth within only a few moments. As a result, Newman's compositions continued influencing audiences for many years after the film's original release. The post-production process also reinforced one of the film's defining artistic qualities: restraint. Nearly every important editorial decision involved removing rather than adding material. Scenes became shorter. Dialogue became simpler. Music became quieter. The ending became more visually focused. These choices demonstrate remarkable confidence. Rather than explaining every emotion directly, the filmmakers trusted audiences to understand subtle performances, visual symbolism, and quiet moments. This restraint contributes greatly to the film's timeless appeal. Modern audiences continue discovering new emotional details because the film never overwhelms them with excessive exposition or sentimentality. Instead, it invites viewers to participate emotionally by interpreting characters' expressions, actions, and relationships. Looking back, it becomes clear that post-production shaped The Shawshank Redemption just as profoundly as writing, casting, or filming. Frank Darabont and his creative collaborators refined the story with extraordinary care, removing scenes that slowed the narrative, restructuring the opening for greater impact, simplifying dialogue to strengthen emotion, and embracing audience feedback when it genuinely improved the film. Thomas Newman's delicate score provided a musical voice for hope without overshadowing the performances, while the decision to include Andy and Red's reunion transformed an already powerful story into one of cinema's most satisfying endings. Every editorial choice reflected a commitment to emotional honesty, narrative clarity, and artistic restraint. The result was a beautifully balanced film whose post-production decisions helped elevate it from an excellent prison drama into one of the most enduring, inspiring, and emotionally resonant masterpieces in the history of motion pictures. The release of The Shawshank Redemption, 1994, is one of the most fascinating stories in modern film history. Today, the movie is widely regarded as one of the greatest films ever made, admired by critics, filmmakers, and audiences across the world. However, its path to becoming a timeless classic was far from easy. Instead of opening as a major commercial success, the film experienced a slow and difficult theatrical run. It struggled at the box office, competed against some of the biggest films ever released, and initially failed to attract the large audiences that its creators believed it deserved. Ironically, many of the qualities that later made it legendary, its thoughtful storytelling, emotional depth, and quiet pace, also contributed to its disappointing performance during its original theatrical release. Before any major film reaches theaters, studios often organize test screenings. These are private showings where ordinary members of the public watch an unfinished or nearly completed version of the film. Their reactions help filmmakers understand what works well and what might need improvement before the official release. The Shawshank Redemption performed exceptionally well during these screenings. Audience reactions were overwhelmingly positive. People became deeply emotionally involved with Andy Dufresne's story. Many viewers praised the friendship between Andy and Red, admired the emotional ending, and responded strongly to the film's central message of hope. Producer Liz Glotzer later described these test screenings as some of the best she had ever witnessed during her career. The audience response gave the filmmakers tremendous confidence. Everyone involved believed they had created a truly special film. Positive test screenings usually encourage studios because they suggest that general audiences will respond similarly once the film is released nationwide. However, excellent test screenings do not always guarantee commercial success. Many other factors influence whether people actually buy movie tickets. Marketing, competition, release timing, audience expectations, reviews, and even a film's title can significantly affect box office performance. The marketing campaign for The Shawshank Redemption reflected some unusual decisions. One particularly interesting choice involved author Stephen King's name. By 1994, Stephen King had already become one of the world's most famous writers. Many of his novels had been adapted into successful films. However, his reputation centered primarily on horror fiction. Stories such as The Shining, Cujo, Carrie, and Christine had established him as the master of supernatural terror and psychological horror. Although Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption belong to an entirely different genre, studio executives worried that prominently advertising Stephen King's name might create false expectations. People might assume the film contained monsters, supernatural events, or frightening horror sequences. Instead, audiences would discover a slow, emotional prison drama. The marketing team feared that this mismatch might disappoint viewers. At the same time, they hoped to attract a more prestigious adult audience interested in serious dramatic storytelling. Some executives believed those viewers might overlook a film associated with an author known primarily for horror fiction. Therefore, much of the advertising minimized Stephen King's involvement. Rather than emphasizing the source material, promotional campaigns focused on the emotional story and acclaimed performances. Although understandable from a marketing perspective, this decision remains interesting because Stephen King's name later became an important selling point for many adaptations. Before its general release, the film premiered at several important events. One early showing took place at the Renaissance Theater in Mansfield, Ohio. This location held special significance because much of the movie had been filmed nearby at the historic Ohio State Reformatory. The premiere allowed local residents, many of whom had participated as extras or supported production, to celebrate the completed film. The Shawshank Redemption also screened at the prestigious Toronto International Film Festival. Film festivals provide opportunities for critics, journalists, distributors, and industry professionals to view new productions before their commercial release. Positive festival reactions can generate valuable publicity and encourage audiences to see a film. The official North American theatrical release began on September 23, 1994. Rather than opening immediately across thousands of theaters, the film received what is known as a limited release. Only 33 theaters initially showed the movie. This strategy is often used for serious dramas because studios hope positive reviews and word-of-mouth recommendations will gradually build public interest before expanding nationwide. During its opening weekend, The Shawshank Redemption earned approximately $727,000. Although this total appears modest compared with blockbuster releases, averages per theater remained respectable. Each location generated roughly $22,000 during the weekend. These figures suggested that audiences attending the film generally appreciated it. Nevertheless, the limited number of theaters naturally restricted total earnings. One charming story from opening weekend illustrates the uncertainty surrounding the film's commercial prospects. Following a long Hollywood tradition, director Frank Darabont and producer Liz Glotzer visited theaters anonymously to observe audience reactions. Many filmmakers enjoy quietly sitting among ordinary viewers to experience their work exactly as audiences do. Darabont and Glotzer chose the famous Cinerama Dome Theater in Hollywood. To their surprise, almost no one attended the screening. The nearly empty auditorium reflected the challenge facing the film. Despite outstanding test screenings, the general public remained largely unaware of it. According to Glotzer, the situation became so disappointing that she and Darabont personally encouraged two people outside the theater to buy tickets. They even joked that if the viewers disliked the movie, Castle Rock Entertainment would refund their money. Whether entirely literal or slightly exaggerated, the story demonstrates how passionately the filmmakers believed in their work despite its slow commercial beginning. Critical reception during the release period was generally positive. Many reviewers praised the screenplay, direction, performances, and emotional storytelling. However, not every review proved equally enthusiastic. Glotzer later expressed disappointment with one particularly lukewarm review published by the Los Angeles Times. She believed that because the newspaper held significant influence within Southern California, its mixed response discouraged some potential viewers. Whether one review alone substantially affected box office results remains impossible to determine. Nevertheless, film criticism often influences audience decisions, especially for dramas that rely upon strong reviews rather than spectacular visual effects or famous franchises. Several weeks after the limited release, Columbia Pictures expanded the film nationwide. On October 14, 1994, The Shawshank Redemption opened in 944 theaters across North America. This wider release represented the studio's effort to reach a much larger audience. During that weekend, the film earned approximately $2.4 million. Although respectable, these numbers fell short of expectations for a nationwide expansion. The average earnings per theater dropped significantly compared with the limited release. This indicated that while audiences who discovered the film often appreciated it, attracting new viewers remained difficult. At the weekend box office, the film finished in 9th place. Several other productions attracted greater attention. Among them was the comedy Exit to Eden, which earned slightly more despite receiving far weaker critical reviews. Another competitor, the historical drama quiz show, remained popular despite already spending several weeks in theaters. These results demonstrated that critical acclaim alone does not guarantee commercial success. By late November 1994, after approximately 10 weeks in theaters, The Shawshank Redemption concluded its initial theatrical run. Its total domestic earnings reached roughly $16 million. Considering that production alone had cost approximately $25 million, the financial results appeared disappointing. Marketing expenses further increased the overall investment. Additionally, movie theaters retain a significant percentage of ticket sales before studios receive their share. Consequently, the film failed to recover its production costs during its original release. Within Hollywood, it was widely labeled a box office disappointment. Yet the circumstances surrounding its release reveal why success proved so difficult. Perhaps the greatest challenge involved competition. 1994 is widely considered one of the strongest years in modern cinema. Several extraordinary films reached theaters within months of one another. Among them stood Pulp Fiction. Directed by Quentin Tarantino, the film became an instant cultural sensation. Its unconventional storytelling, memorable dialogue, and stylish direction attracted enormous attention following its prestigious international award victory. Pulp Fiction premiered nationally on exactly the same day that The Shawshank Redemption expanded into wide release. The two films therefore competed directly for adult audiences interested in serious dramatic storytelling. At the same time, another phenomenon dominated theaters. Forrest Gump had already become one of the year's biggest successes. By October, it had spent months attracting enormous audiences while generating enthusiastic word of mouth. Unlike many films that experience rapid declines after opening weekends, Forrest Gump continued performing exceptionally well for over 40 weeks. Its emotional story, humor, romance, and historical themes appealed to viewers of all ages. As a result, many moviegoers who might otherwise have considered The Shawshank Redemption instead chose Forrest Gump. Both Pulp Fiction and Forrest Gump eventually became defining cultural landmarks of the decade. They generated memorable quotations, widespread media coverage, and repeated public discussion. Competing against two such extraordinary films represented an enormous challenge for any production. The Shawshank Redemption, despite its exceptional quality, simply struggled to capture comparable public attention during its initial release. Broader audience preferences also influenced the film's commercial performance. The early 1990s witnessed tremendous popularity for action movies starring performers such as Bruce Willis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, and Jean-Claude Van Damme. Audiences frequently sought explosive entertainment featuring spectacular action sequences, elaborate special effects, and charismatic heroes. Compared with these productions, The Shawshank Redemption offered something very different. Its story unfolds patiently. Much of the drama comes through conversations, friendships, emotional development, and quiet perseverance. There are no spectacular battles or fast-paced action scenes. Instead, the excitement comes from character growth and long-term storytelling. Although these qualities eventually became reasons audiences admired the film, they initially limited its appeal among viewers expecting more conventional entertainment. Another surprisingly important issue involved the film's title. Today, The Shawshank Redemption is recognized instantly around the world. However, before release many studio executives worried that audiences would find the title confusing. Unlike titles that immediately communicate genre or subject matter, The Shawshank Redemption provides few obvious clues. Potential viewers unfamiliar with the story might not know whether it concerns religion, history, crime, or something else entirely. Morgan Freeman later joked that the title lacked memorability. Tim Robbins recalled humorous encounters with people who could not remember its name correctly. Some referred to it using completely incorrect versions that sounded similar but made little sense. These stories highlight an important aspect of movie marketing. A title serves as the audience's first introduction to a film. If people struggle to remember or pronounce it, recommending the movie to friends becomes more difficult. Because of these concerns, several alternative titles were reportedly considered before release. Ultimately, however, the filmmakers retained the original title because it reflected the story's themes and respected Stephen King's novella. Although commercially risky at the time, the title later became one of the most recognizable names in cinema history. Marketing experts also identified demographic challenges. The film contains very few female characters. Most of the story occurs inside a men's prison populated almost entirely by male inmates and guards. Studios worried that this setting might discourage portions of the audience seeking romance, family relationships, or broader character diversity. Although women ultimately embraced the film alongside men, initial marketing concerns reflected common industry assumptions about audience preferences. The prison setting itself created another obstacle. Historically, prison dramas had rarely achieved major commercial success. Many viewers associated the genre with violence, despair, and bleak subject matter. Without actually seeing The Shawshank Redemption, potential audiences may have assumed it was another grim prison movie focused exclusively on brutality. In reality, the film uses prison primarily as a backdrop for exploring hope, friendship, personal growth, and redemption. Unfortunately, many people did not discover these deeper themes until years later. The advertising campaign unintentionally reinforced some of these misconceptions. Trailers emphasized dramatic prison scenes, emotional struggles, and serious dialogue. Although accurate, this approach conveyed a rather somber atmosphere. Potential audiences may have concluded that the film would be emotionally exhausting rather than inspiring. Those who eventually watched it realized the opposite. Despite depicting hardship, the movie ultimately celebrates hope, resilience, and the triumph of the human spirit. By early 1995, however, circumstances began changing. Award season dramatically increased public awareness. The Shawshank Redemption received several major Academy Award nominations. Although it did not win the top prizes, the nominations signaled to audiences that critics and industry professionals considered it one of the year's finest achievements. As a result, Columbia Pictures decided to return the film to theaters. This re-release occurred between February and March 1995. Many viewers who had previously overlooked the film now became curious. The renewed theatrical run earned approximately an additional $12 million domestically. Combined with the original release, North American earnings reached roughly $28.3 million. International audiences also gradually discovered the film. Outside the United States and Canada, worldwide markets contributed approximately $45 million. When The Shawshank Redemption was released in 1994, few people could have predicted that it would eventually become one of the most celebrated films in cinematic history. Today, it regularly appears on lists of the greatest films ever made, is admired by audiences across multiple generations, and continues to inspire viewers with its themes of hope, perseverance, friendship, and redemption. However, its journey to becoming a timeless masterpiece was anything but immediate. Unlike many successful films that become instant blockbusters upon release, The Shawshank Redemption experienced a slow and gradual rise to fame. Its true success unfolded over many years through positive word of mouth, home video, television broadcasts, and the unwavering admiration of audiences who continued recommending it to others. The film's remarkable transformation from a commercial disappointment into a cultural phenomenon remains one of the most extraordinary success stories in Hollywood history. A difficult beginning. The initial theatrical release of The Shawshank Redemption did not produce the financial success that the filmmakers had hoped for. Although critics praised the movie for its intelligent screenplay, emotional storytelling, outstanding performances, and thoughtful direction, large audiences did not immediately flock to theaters. The film earned far less than expected during its original run, making it appear as though the project had failed commercially. Several factors contributed to this disappointing beginning. First, the film entered theaters during one of the strongest years in modern cinema. Numerous critically acclaimed and commercially successful movies were competing for audience attention. Viewers had many options, and several of those films quickly became cultural sensations. Against such powerful competition, a quiet prison drama found it difficult to stand out. The marketing campaign also presented significant challenges. The title, The Shawshank Redemption, did not immediately communicate what kind of story the film told. Many people found it difficult to remember or pronounce, while others assumed it was a religious film or an unusually serious historical drama. Unlike titles that clearly suggest action, romance, or comedy, Shawshank's title offered very little information to casual moviegoers. The prison setting created another obstacle. Historically, prison dramas had not been major box office attractions. Many audiences associated prison films with violence, brutality, or depressing subject matter. Without actually seeing the movie, potential viewers often assumed it would be emotionally exhausting or overly grim. In reality, although the story depicts suffering and injustice, it ultimately delivers one of the most hopeful and uplifting messages ever presented in cinema. As a result of these circumstances, the film's theatrical earnings remained modest. Industry observers labeled it a financial disappointment, and many assumed it would gradually disappear from public memory after leaving theaters. Fortunately, they could not have been more mistaken. The power of word of mouth. Even during its theatrical run, something unusual began happening. People who actually watched the film often became passionate advocates for it. Instead of merely saying that it was enjoyable, viewers enthusiastically recommended it to friends, family members, co-workers, and neighbors. Unlike films that rely heavily on spectacular visual effects or shocking plot twists, The Shawshank Redemption created a deep emotional connection with its audience. People remembered Andy Dufresne's resilience, Red's wisdom, and the unforgettable ending long after leaving the theater. Many viewers found themselves discussing the film for weeks afterward. They recommended it repeatedly because they genuinely believed others should experience it. This type of recommendation carries enormous influence. Advertising can persuade someone to purchase a ticket once. A sincere recommendation from a trusted friend often creates lifelong fans. As more people discovered the movie, its reputation slowly began growing. Rather than fading away, Shawshank quietly built one of the strongest word-of-mouth reputations in film history. Every new viewer became another ambassador for the movie. This steady accumulation of positive recommendations would eventually transform its destiny. The impact of VHS rentals and home video. Perhaps the single most important turning point in the film's history came after it had already left theaters. During the mid-1990s, home video represented one of the most important methods through which audiences discovered movies. Families frequently visited local video rental stores on weekends, browsing shelves filled with hundreds of VHS tapes before selecting one or two films to watch together. Although studios sometimes hesitated to produce large numbers of rental copies for commercially unsuccessful films, Warner Home Video made an unusually bold decision. The company distributed hundreds of thousands of VHS rental copies across the United States. At the time, this represented a considerable financial investment. Because the theatrical release had underperformed, many people questioned whether so many rental copies would actually be needed. The gamble proved remarkably successful. Almost immediately, rental stores reported exceptionally strong demand. Customers who had missed the film in theaters suddenly had an opportunity to watch it from the comfort of their own homes. Without the pressure of choosing among dozens of new theatrical releases, audiences could discover the movie at their own pace. Many people rented it simply because friends had recommended it. Others selected it after reading positive reviews. Still others became curious after hearing repeated praise from co-workers or relatives. Once viewers actually watched the film, the response became overwhelmingly positive. Rental stores frequently found their copies checked out. Customers returned specifically asking for Shawshank after hearing recommendations. Soon it became one of the most requested titles available. The movie ultimately became the highest rented film of the year. This remarkable achievement completely reversed the perception of its commercial performance. Instead of being remembered as a failed theatrical release, it became a tremendous success in the home entertainment market. Why home viewing helped the film? Watching The Shawshank Redemption at home actually suited the film's storytelling style remarkably well. Unlike loud action movies that depend upon giant cinema screens and booming sound systems, Shawshank relies primarily on character development, dialogue, emotional performances, and thoughtful pacing. Viewers could become completely immersed in Andy and Red's friendship without distractions. Families often watched the film together. Friends recommended it during casual conversations. Many people watched it multiple times. Repeated viewings revealed details that audiences had missed during their first experience. The carefully planted clues surrounding Andy's escape became easier to appreciate. Subtle performances gained greater emotional depth. Themes of hope and perseverance resonated even more strongly after viewers already knew the ending. Unlike many films that lose excitement after the first viewing, Shawshank actually becomes richer with repetition. This unusual quality greatly contributed to its growing popularity. People who purchased or rented the film repeatedly introduced it to new audiences. Parents later shared it with their children. Another reason home audiences embraced the film involved its universal themes. Although the setting is a prison, the story itself is about much more than incarceration. Andy represents perseverance under impossible circumstances. Red symbolizes personal growth and the courage to embrace hope after decades of disappointment. Their friendship demonstrates loyalty, compassion, and mutual respect. These emotional themes speak to audiences regardless of age, nationality, or background. Viewers do not need personal experience with prison to understand feelings of isolation, injustice, fear, determination, or hope. Nearly everyone has faced challenges requiring patience and resilience. The movie reminds audiences that even the darkest situations can eventually lead toward freedom if one refuses to surrender hope. This universal message made the film especially suitable for repeated family viewing. Both men and women appreciated its emotional sincerity. Older viewers admired its wisdom. Younger audiences found inspiration in Andy's determination. The film's broad emotional appeal helped it reach audiences far beyond those typically interested in prison dramas. Television broadcasts introduced millions of new viewers. Another enormous turning point occurred when cable television began broadcasting the film regularly. Television exposure dramatically expanded the audience. People who had never rented the VHS suddenly encountered the movie while browsing television channels. Many began watching simply because they happened to discover it already playing. Others intentionally tuned in after hearing repeated recommendations. Unlike theatrical releases, television allowed audiences to experience the movie completely free after subscribing to cable services. This eliminated another barrier preventing potential viewers from discovering it. One network proved especially important: the role of TNT. Turner Broadcasting acquired the rights to air The Shawshank Redemption on its cable network, TNT. Because the film had not generated enormous theatrical revenue, the television broadcasting rights could be obtained relatively inexpensively. For TNT, this represented an excellent opportunity. The network acquired an exceptional film while spending less than would have been required for many major blockbuster productions. The first broadcasts quickly demonstrated something remarkable. Audiences responded enthusiastically. Ratings remained consistently strong. Viewers watched the film repeatedly. Unlike many movies that people enjoy once before moving on, Shawshank encouraged repeated viewing. Even if audiences encountered it halfway through, many continued watching until the conclusion. The emotional story remained compelling regardless of how many times people had previously seen it. Recognizing its popularity, TNT continued scheduling the movie frequently. Year after year, millions of additional viewers discovered it through television. The network essentially became responsible for introducing an entirely new generation to the film. Becoming a television favorite. Repeated television broadcasts produced a fascinating cultural effect. People began associating certain holidays or weekends with seeing The Shawshank Redemption on television. Families who had watched it years earlier happily watched it again whenever it appeared. Friends recommended that newcomers avoid changing the channel. Even casual viewers who initially intended to watch only a few minutes often became completely absorbed until the ending. The movie developed extraordinary rewatch value. Very few films maintain audience attention despite repeated broadcasts. Most lose their novelty after several viewings. Shawshank demonstrated exactly the opposite pattern. Each viewing deepened appreciation. People noticed new dialogue. They understood symbolic moments more clearly. Foreshadowing became increasingly impressive. As a result, audiences rarely complained about seeing the film again. Instead, many welcomed the opportunity. Its popularity on television continued growing year after year, expanding across different audiences. One particularly remarkable aspect of the film's television success involved its diverse audience. Although nearly every major character is male and the story takes place inside a men's prison, the movie appealed equally to women. Networks serving different demographic groups all reported strong viewership. The film attracted young adults, older viewers, families, longtime movie enthusiasts, and casual television audiences alike. This broad popularity demonstrated that viewers connected primarily with the emotional journey rather than the setting. Hope, friendship, forgiveness, and personal redemption proved universally meaningful. Very few films achieve such widespread appeal across so many different groups. Long-term commercial success. Although the theatrical release disappointed financially, the years following its release completely changed the film's commercial fortunes. Home video rentals generated substantial income. VHS purchases continued for years. Later, DVD editions became popular as home entertainment technology evolved. Special collector's editions encouraged longtime fans to purchase the film again. Eventually, Blu-ray and Ultra HD editions introduced the movie to viewers seeking improved picture and sound quality. Every technological advancement created another opportunity for audiences to rediscover the film. Television licensing also generated considerable long-term revenue. Networks repeatedly renewed broadcasting agreements because viewers consistently responded positively. Unlike many films that lose value after several years, Shawshank became increasingly valuable. Its enduring popularity transformed it into one of the most important assets within the studio's film library. From a business perspective, the movie demonstrated that theatrical earnings represent only one stage of a film's commercial life. Home entertainment, television licensing, digital distribution, and international audiences can collectively produce enormous long-term financial success? A film that continued earning for decades. Perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of The Shawshank Redemption's commercial history is its longevity. Many successful movies earn most of their income during the first few months after release before gradually fading from public attention. Shawshank followed the opposite path.